before I'll kick it off to Amy, but before, just a reminder that today's board meeting is a work session only. We are not going to be taking any action on any items. It's just informational, and we will not be taking any public comment today. So, so welcome to everybody who is here and joining us, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to Amy so that she can take roll call.
Sounds good. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Mr. Ahrens, Madam Co-Chair, is excused today. He's not able to attend this work session. Mr. Brown. And I see Mr. Brown. I see him waving his hands.
Yeah, there, now, present. I was not unmuted, so.
Thank you. Ms. DeVore.
Present.
And
Yes,
in
ma'am.
For real.
Yes.
Present.
Ms. Johnson.
Present.
Mr. Kenyon. I don't see Mr. Kenyon yet. We'll keep watching. Mr. Klein.
Present.
Mr. Law.
Here.
Ms. Moore. Here. Mr. Smith.
Present.
Ms. Thayer.
Present.
And Ms. Tomasi. We'll keep watching for Ms. Tomasi too. Okay, Madam Co-Chair, we do have quorum of the board, but as you mentioned, this is a work session. No action will be taken. And we are here to listen and learn and to collaborate. So Josh, I'll turn it back to you.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining in, and thanks for the flexibility. I think sometimes you might think, oh, well, going virtual is actually easier because then we can stay put. But I think with everybody's travel plans and everything that was going on and all the arrangements, it's still an inconvenience. So we really appreciate everybody being flexible and being safe above all else. As you can all imagine, with our board members being spread all over the state, as well as our team spread all over the state, we just feel like sometimes the best thing to do is to utilize technology in times like these. And what will end up happening is that we will have a positive impact on the weather, and there will be sunny skies and no snow for the next few days because we went virtual. Absolutely. So you're welcome for those of you who need to travel later in the week. It'll be great for you. And all jokes aside, we just appreciate everybody's flexibility, and we appreciate the technology to be able to do this. I'm actually going to turn it over to Ron Goldberg, and I'm not sure if he knew it or not, but I'm going to put him on the spot. He's been working with the Workforce Development Council for a long time, and he's been somebody who we rely on a lot to work on our partnerships, and Ron is our strategic partners director. And so, Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think this was in a lot of ways your brainchild. So thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. Yeah, as an ex officio representing the Business Council and the Workforce Development Council, Kari and Jennifer, you see out here, and Director Cooley, we kind of started talking last year when we noticed that the council and the Business Council board kind of had their quarterly meetings the same weeks, but in different locations. And we thought, what a great opportunity to get a work session together to let each board understand what the other board does and the respective agencies do. So very excited about this opportunity today. And just because we are going virtual, we've talked about letting the presenters present. And what we'd really like to do is have people jot down any questions they have along the way and have about a half hour for a good Q&A, maybe some brainstorming. We'll see where it goes, but a vigorous discussion, I think, would be a great opportunity to wrap this thing up. We will start with workforce services, and then we'll go to Lauren with a WIP presentation, and then Josh will present for the Business Council, and then we'll kick into the engaging Q&A. So to get things rolling, introduce two members of Workforce Services who do a great job with their Workforce Development Council. We have Jennifer Welch, the Workforce Services Liaison, and Kari Eakins, who is Policy Research and Communications Division Administrator. That's a good title, Kari. But anyway, I know you guys want to share the screen, so go ahead and I'll wrap things up if you want to start sharing, and we can dive into your workforce services presentation. All right, that was easy. Yeah, Kari and Jennifer, go ahead and take over from here.
All right, well, thank you so much, Ron. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kari Aiken. Thank you for that introduction. And Jennifer Wilch is also on with me to present, and we're going to be, we are both Department of Workforce Services employees, but we're going to be touching on the Workforce Development Council and how we work together on things. So it's a fun layer of governance that you'll see on one of our slides. But just want to start off by thanking you so much for letting us join today with this work session, and also to calm the Workforce Development Council members down. We are just using the participant list to count who is present for our own process of taking minutes. So you don't have to worry about that. We're not going to try to like promote people to be able to say aye or nay on a roll call of 30 potential people when it's a webinar that we're not running. So that's how that's going to work on the Workforce Development Council side of things. And so I'll go ahead and kind of get going here. Just first off with the structure of the Wyoming Workforce Development Council. For this council, everything exists because of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is a major federal workforce law. It's had different iterations over the years. The latest rewrite was done in 2014. Before that, the last version sat for about 15 years before Congress did a major rewrite. So while there have been rumblings of Congress doing more on this federal law, we don't believe it fully yet. It needs to be a bipartisan effort. But you can see that there's two main things that this law does. The first is it's aimed at helping job seekers access employment, education, training, and support services so that they can be successful in the job market. And then the second part of that is matching employers with the skilled workers that they need in order to have a competitive business. So everything we do pretty much comes down to what this federal law tells us to do. And so I want to take just a moment and talk about this council is required. Every state has to have a workforce development board. But when we talk about workforce development, what does that really mean? Because in general, when you talk about a workforce development system, it's just about anything that you can think of that involves agencies, programs, activities, individuals, anything that's preparing people to obtain or sustain a job or helping employers find those people. But technically, when we're talking about the Workforce Development Council, we're talking about that workforce development system. It is what you can see right here, a system that makes available the WIOA core program, the other one-stop partner programs, and any other programs providing employment and training services as identified by a state board. So while workforce development is a very broad term, there are some very specific things that the Workforce Development Council works on. And so we're going to spend some time breaking a lot of those terms down, because I don't know how many people know exactly what a one-stop partner program is in everyday conversation. So here you can see kind of the complicated governance structure that is in place. So under that federal law, it is the governor's office, but technically it's the governor's funds in every state. And so the Department of Workforce Services is the designated fiscal agent that accepts the governor's funds for Wyoming that are from the U.S. Department of Labor. And then the Workforce Development Council serves as that state workforce development board to provide that high-level guidance. And then the Department of Workforce Services is also the service provider of those services as advised on by the council. So in Wyoming, we're kind of unique because we serve as both the state provider, like we're that designated fiscal agent helping the governor assist in utilizing these funds in Wyoming and organizing the council. But then we're also the local provider that makes things happen on the ground floor. And that's not the case in every state, but it is the case in ours because of our low population. And now I'm going to go ahead and toss to Jennifer Wilch. As Ron mentioned, she's the liaison for the Workforce Development Council, and she's going to go over what these core programs are in WIOA.
Thank you. So WIOA has
4 titles, and so we call those technically 5, but the 5th one is just general provisions. But the 4 titles are what are considered the core programs for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. In Title 1, that includes adult, youth, and dislocated worker, and there's eligibility criteria for these programs. Title 2, and the Department of Workforce Services administers Title 1. Title 2 is for adult education and literacy, which includes the English language services, and that is administered by the Community College Commission. Title 3 provides funding for what's called the Wagner-Pizer Employment Services Program, and that's basically everything that Wyoming at Work does for the state. So that's services for individuals who are unemployed to look at job postings and services for employers for posting those jobs, and also soft skills. So there's a lot of trainings that are on Wyoming at Work that are free of charge and people can use for those soft skills. Also administered by Department of Workforce Services. And then Title 4 is for services for individuals with disabilities, also known as vocational rehabilitation, and that is also administered by the Department of Workforce Services.
Okay, so now that we've gone out and through all these terms at you, I do want to take just a moment to pause so we can all kind of get a good picture in our mind of what a participant in these programs might look like. So this is actually a real person, Kevin, that came into the Casper Workforce Center, and he was mentioned as a success story in one of our federal reports that we did. And so Kevin was a welder in the oil field. He was laid off due to oil and gas downturn and COVID that came into the Workforce Center in Casper. Initially, he just wanted help filing for unemployment. Most people, when they go to file for unemployment, it's their first time filing for unemployment, and a lot of them need a little bit of help. Kevin did, so he came into the Casper Workforce Center. The only trade he had ever worked in was welding. And through working with the Workforce Center staff, he had a case manager assigned to him in Casper that began working with him, showed him some of the possibilities of WIOA. Through that, they were trying to find him employment initially in welding, but they were unable to do that. And then in other areas, he couldn't find sustainable employment because he had no experience or training in any other field. So through working with the case manager, they realized that he was eligible for some things such as a skills assessment. And they went through and looked at where his strengths were and things that could translate. And they decided that he should receive CDL training and get his CDL license. So he received that certification through a WIOA program. And then he actually was able to get a job as a driver for a local cement company in Casper. And then an additional piece was that as part of that employment was he was required to have steel-toed boots. And so there was actually, he was able to use some WIOA funding to pay for help him pay for the purchase of the steel-toed boots that he needed for his new job. So that's kind of what one of these stories looks like. And Jennifer, you can touch a little bit more on kind of where that fits it through those core programs.
Right, so Kevin could qualify as an adult or in the adult program because of his age, but he also qualified for our dislocated worker program because he was laid off from his employment and was receiving unemployment insurance. So Kevin actually qualified for multiple programs, and a lot of times the decision on which program or to dual enroll him in program has to do with the funding that's available in those programs. He also came to the Workforce Center because of a required partner program. And so that's a nice segue to talk about in WIOA, there are required partner programs that we must work with. And I just wanted to highlight a few. So he came into the system through unemployment insurance, which is administered by the Department of Workforce Services. Other required programs could be, or that are required for us, are the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act, the Jobs for Veterans State Grant, temporary assistance for needy families, that's administered by Department of Family Services, but a portion is administered by the Department of Workforce Services. And those services, again, revolve around getting back into the labor force. Also, the Job Corps, we have several centers that have Job Corps located in the center. And then the migrants and seasonal farmer or farm worker program and the senior community service employment program are just a few of those that are heavily integrated into our workforce systems.
So with having all of those things that they kind of have to make sure are going the way they want to be going, this is the structure that was set up for the Workforce Development Council in Wyoming. Governor Meade was in office at the time and issued the executive order for how he wanted this council to look in Wyoming, and that's what has been operated underneath ever since. So you can see there that the governor is at the top. The governor appoints the members of the Workforce Development Council, of course, also appoints the director of the Department of Workforce Services. And then the council decided to have these 4 committees to help them do their business that touches on a lot of different areas. So there's an executive committee that is allowed to make decisions on behalf of the full council if we can't get the full council together and to provide leadership in general. Then you also have the Next Gen Sector Partnerships and Career Pathways that looks more at the employer and industry side of things, communications and community relations that makes sure we're getting good input. And then also strategic performance and finance that does a lot of just making sure we're keeping track of what we need to keep track of and doing what we want to make sure we're doing. This is the actual membership of the council. It is very large, but as you can see, the largest part of it is business. So under that executive order that Governor Meade created, it has a specification that 50% of the council has to be made up of members of business. There is representation from the governor's office, from the Senate, from the House of Representatives. There's also members that are representative of different pieces of the workforce. So you can see the ones there. That does include someone that works for an organization that serves veterans. And then also there's representation from several different government entities. So you can see here, our own director is on there, the DFS director. There's a county commissioner, a mayor, the executive director of the Community College Commission, the state superintendent of public instruction, the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council, and then also an additional representative from Department of Workforce Services that works at that local level. So it is a very broad group and a very diverse group. So they have really amazing conversations because there's representation from so many different entities. And when we look at kind of the high level, what these council members need to do, they need to advise DWS on the workforce programs and if they're doing what they want them to be doing, and act as agents for change to improve Wyoming's workforce. If something needs to change, this is an entity that can help make sure that happens. And then also receiving and sharing community input. We do have, regional representation as part of the board as well. And so needing to make sure that when the council is making decisions, that they are making decisions on behalf of the people of Wyoming. And that's the high level. This is the nitty gritty of what they've got to do. And Jennifer's going to walk us through this.
So these are the things that are required or strongly advised, that are actual functions of the Workforce Development Council. So the first thing is, and this is required, is that they are to determine the funding allocations. And then we listed there the kind of dollar amounts that we're talking about. And then the council has up to 15% that can go to the council's required activities that we'll talk about in a minute, and then the council initiatives. So we have some grants that the council can give out, and that's part of their initiatives or any outreach that is done on behalf of the council and WIOA. That's where those funding comes from. The rest is administration and participant dollars. So the money that actually goes to the participants for their training or any services that they might need so that they can get into the labor market, such as we saw with Kevin, where he needed some steel-toed boots. That was a barrier to employment after he received his training. That was really important so that he could get that job. The next item that's a function of the council is to, and required, is to conduct evaluations of the workforce system and then monitoring of the WIOA Title I programs. They also are to support sector strategies, partnerships, and career pathways. And we do this through the Next Gen Sector Partnership model. And so when you hear about Next Gen Sector Partnerships, the council is supporting these, which is why there are grants that can be given to these partnerships. But we also provide technical assistance, and we have a contractor who meets with individuals to help facilitate these partnerships. As mentioned several times, the council provides grants from their up to 15% that they can receive to Wyoming entities. The council just recently voted to fund a keynote speaker sponsorship for the state FBLA leadership conference. And this is a great opportunity for the council to promote the WIOA programs to youth, both youth that might possibly be able to utilize it now, but they'll become adults someday. And they also have family members and they're members of the community who might benefit from WIOA programs. And then we have the Next Gen Sector Partnership Grant, and that's specific just for partnerships. And that grant is to really target and support the actual partnership and not an individual business. The grants that are for Wyoming entities is more broad, but must be part of the workforce system. And then the board in general provides strategic direction and policy guidance to the state and the one-stop workforce system. And so that will be policies that guide those one-stops, those workforce centers that are throughout the state.
And so the council has actually been undergoing some strategic planning because they also have a federal plan that has to be rewritten every 4 years. And we've just entered another year where we're about to have to do that work. And so the chair felt it was a good moment to look at the overall mission vision of what the council is doing. And so this is a fresh vision that the council has developed. We envision a Wyoming where every employee and job seeker has an opportunity to secure purposeful and rewarding work, and where employers can access a prepared workforce to help grow the state's economy. So that's been a lot of work of the council. We'll be continuing some of that during our quarterly meeting that's coming up over the next couple of days, getting into some specific goals. But that's a kind of the council as whole. So now we've used the phrase one-stop or one-stop operations a few times. That is we showed those core programs and the partner programs. There has to be a one place that someone can go to access all of those. And in Wyoming, it is our workforce centers. And so this is what the one-stop system looks like in Wyoming. And Jennifer is going to give us a quick overview of this.
So we talked about already about how we got to having these one-stop centers, and that DWS administers these workforce centers, but Casper is our comprehensive one-stop center, which provides access to all partner programs for employment and training services. And then we have 17 other workforce centers that have affiliates and or have specialized sites. The integration of the core programs are there, plus some additional, and many of them are also administered by the Department of Workforce Services, as we talked about earlier. And then this system, or all these one-stops, are really designed to be a place where a customer can come and get access to everything you need. So even if they come into one of our 17 other workforce centers that aren't the comprehensive one, those individuals there are still trained and able to meet the customer where they are. And even in the areas where we don't have workforce centers, again, we have people who might travel and meet the customers where they are. We also have MOUs that with all of our required partners to make sure that we have infrastructure and funding agreements, but also that we're on the same page about how to serve our customers.
And here you can see where all the brick and mortar workforce centers are across Wyoming. As Jennifer mentioned, just because there's not a actual workforce center in your community, that doesn't mean that the area is not being served. There are a lot of workforce centers that send people to, certain areas of in their region for, 1 to 2 days a week. So one example of this would be like in Afton right now. There's times when they advertise in the community and let them know, hey, if you need in-person help, we're going to be at the library. Or it might be, like in the town hall, there's an office or there's a conference room that they're willing to let us sit at for a few hours, but just in case there's walk-in traffic, where they can make an appointment to meet with people, even if there's not a workforce center. But one of the biggest changes has been figuring out how to offer kind of the virtual one-stop, so that if people cannot make it into an actual workforce center, how can we still make sure that we're serving their needs fully? Next is the eligible training provider list. And this is basically providers that the council approved to provide employment training under WIOA, and then there's funding that is associated with that. And so Jennifer, you want to go a little bit more in depth for me?
So this is another required activity of the Workforce Development Council. And one of their subcommittees, the Strategic Performance and Finance Committee, creates the policies around the eligible training provider list, and then they vote and approve the trainer or training entities that can be used for our adult dislocated worker and youth individuals who enter our program. Specifically for dislocated workers, the trainings that they should receive should be in-demand industries and occupations, and it should lead to a better career outcome than what they just came from, because our dislocated workers have been laid off, and so we don't want to put them in an industry that puts them back into that place where they may be laid off again. Now, these entities can be of higher education institutions, they can be apprenticeship programs, public or private providers that provide the type of training. We see this a lot with cosmetology training, and in some areas, this is something that's needed in that community. And then we have adult education providers. Now, this list is maintained in Wyoming at Work, and so anyone can see who those are and what those trainings are. So when we talk about high level and how this can relate to the business council, this is a list of trainers and occupations that we're training in that you can look at when you're talking or to other businesses that are looking to relocate.
And Jennifer actually did a pretty good job of going over these grants. I'm going to go kind of quickly here. We have the 2 grant opportunities that the council uses their 15% set aside to offer to Wyoming entities. So the Workforce System Support Grant is really geared towards things that would assist or help or be beneficial to a WIOA participant. And Jennifer mentioned like we've done one of these so far because this was just approved in November. Our first one was to state FBLA to have a presence at their state leadership conference, pay for their keynote. I believe the local workforce center in Laramie is also going to be providing a resume writing workshop during their conference. But this is pretty wide open so long as it comes back to being beneficial to WIOA participants. And then the other grant that's offered is the Next Gen Sector Partnership Grant. And this is for those sectors. So if I think a lot of members of this council are somewhat familiar with Next Gen and the fact that there are regions that have selected industries such as manufacturing or healthcare or construction. And so any entity can partner with one of those sectors with an initiative to help grow that sector in their region. So, if you're manufacturing or financial tech industry, whatever it is, you can partner then with that next gen sector to help apply for grant funding to help grow the sector in that area of the state. So next is the Workforce Development Training Funds I'm going to give a quick overview of as well. And I think a lot of you are familiar with this just because most people have heard of at least one of the grants that's offered. You can see the full list here of these programs. This is a unique thing that Wyoming does where we take the interest that's earned off of our UI state trust fund, and that is money that is used to fund these grants. So, you know, the business training grants, Wyoming businesses can use those to help employees retrain or upgrade their skills. The internship grants are also available to Wyoming businesses to offer interns and actually pay wages for a certain number of interns. You have a pre-hire economic development grant that entities can use for specific workforce training before a person is actually hired on with an entity. So like CDL licensing is an example of a pre-hire grant that does that. So if before a person's brought on, you know, they can get the training that they need to get hired. And then pre-obligation grants are also available, and that is really used to incentivize relocation or expansion in Wyoming. And I know that a lot of your council members and staff have done a lot of trying to find really good ways to utilize the pre-obligation grant to help fund for those training needs kind of before a business starts operating in Wyoming or in a new location. And then there's also the apprenticeship grant, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to kind of move along right now to make sure that you all know about the rules change that occurred last year. And this really was to expand the flexibility and make sure that the funding limit were at appropriate levels. Some people were finding that the funding limits were prohibitive to providing what they really needed. Especially after COVID, when there was a big pause in some of the training that could occur or the ability to have an intern, there was this big demand coming out of the pandemic. And so these rules changes were made. And so you can see for a lot of these, it was a limit increase. And there are preferred industries, and the preferred industries are actually where the workforce development training funds at DWS interact the most, or interact with the Workforce Development Council, because the council actually looks at what are our next gen industries, what is the labor market data in Wyoming, and help and decide what these preferred industries are going to be. So there are the preferred industries right now are construction, finance and insurance, healthcare and social assistance, manufacturing, technology, and then hospitality and tourism. There's also a couple of other key industries that are not included, such as education, because these grants are only for non-governmental entities. So wouldn't make sense to have them be a preferred industry. But you can see that, like with the pre-hire grants, we added some flexibility to making emergency medical service providers eligible. Those are oftentimes government or quasi-government entities, but that was very necessary to make that available to all of those. And then really just making sure that it's competitive as far as the hourly wage that could be paid for interns, depending on your industry. And then at apprenticeships, looking at adding in some more flexible performance measures there. And as you can see, when you look at the number of applications that have been received and approved, if you compare the numbers from 2021, what we have there in 2023 is actually only through November. And so through the first 5 months of that fiscal year for 2023, and I think just about every area, it was exceeding or quickly approaching the number of applications that were received and approved in 2021. So already just on the number of internships approved in fiscal year 2023, we're at like 242. So it was very much needed based on the response to that rules change. And then talking a little bit more specifically about apprenticeships. So you can see here that DWS works with the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Apprenticeships. That's when it's a registered apprenticeship. And there are those programs and related instruction. And so They do have to be associated with a Wyoming-based sponsor in order to apply, but it covers related technical instruction. It doesn't cover wages. That's a big misconception, but it covers a piece of the instruction for an apprentice and for the instruction component if they're part of that registered apprenticeship program. And we've seen really good responses this year with people applying for that apprenticeship grant and working with the team here at DWS. And then a couple of things that's forward-looking as far as apprenticeships. So the Wyoming legislature did pass SF 78, which is apprenticeship and job training promotion in schools. The governor actually did sign that bill into law on Saturday, and that requires the Department of Workforce Services to provide information about apprenticeships and other kind of on-the-job training opportunities to schools, to secondary schools in Wyoming, and it requires the schools to have guidelines for how students can participate in those opportunities and figuring out, are they going to be able to earn wages for that on-the-job training? Are they going to earn credit, course credit for those opportunities? So very excited about that being passed and hopefully giving a boost to helping students get some earlier exposure to some on-the-job training and through apprenticeships. Then also the department has been approved to use American Rescue Plan funds for a pre-apprenticeship program. So this once again looking down at school level age opportunities. And then also the U.S. Department of Labor has forecasted additional registered apprenticeship funding as well. So as far as apprenticeships right now, things are kind of moving in a good direction. The subcommittee for the council that actually looks at WDTF funds, so pre-hire or pre-obligation and then apprenticeship application, they do have a council subcommittee take a look at those applications to make a recommendation back to Director Cooley regarding what they think is appropriate for those applications. So there is a lot there. As I said, it's a very layered governance structure with a lot of back and forth between the Workforce Development Council and the Department of Workforce Services, but all aimed back at those kind of two main things of helping job seekers find good opportunities that are appropriate for them and help them get any training if necessary needed to get there, and also making sure on the other side of that that employers are able to find the workers that they need as well. So thank you for that time.
Thank you, Kari and Jennifer. And I've jotted down a few notes. I'm sure others have. So we'll make sure we circle back in the last half hour and have an engaging discussion, take any questions. And now we have Lauren Schoenfeld. I know I do. I bet a lot of people on here get questions about what is WIP. And I know that Lauren gets that all the time. But we have Lauren here today to explain what is WIP and what we're doing with higher education and how that ties into workforce services and economic development. Lauren is the governor's executive director of the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. And Lauren, we'll let you take it from there. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. So the Wyoming Innovation Partnership was created at the request of Governor Gordon, and that was in 2021. And it really was to focus on modernizing the efforts around building a resilient workforce and economy. So the partnership involves the University of Wyoming, the state community colleges, the Wyoming Business Council, and the Department of Workforce Services. And it really provides an emphasis around developing innovative solutions. So really, WIP is intending to build on and complementing existing efforts. So many of the things that you all just ran through from Workforce Services and the Workforce Development Council are areas that we are looking to build on and expand and support through higher education and really collaboration. So the Wyoming Innovation Partnership is a collaboration to align education, workforce development, and industry support to really meet Wyoming's economic development needs. So we're aiming to grow the economy and build a highly skilled and ambitious workforce through innovation and by linking the community goals throughout our state with the state's economic strategy. So there's many pieces to economic development. and workforce education development is a very important piece to this puzzle. And many of Wyoming's current and future businesses require building a highly skilled and specified workforce. And without the education, collaboration, and alignment to meet those economic development needs, our diversification across the state is hindered. So in a few minutes, I'm going to go over some of the phase 1 programs and projects, and then the plans that we have moving forward into phase 2. And you're going to see that each of these programs they're different, and yet they satisfy a very different workforce need across the state. They also provide Wyoming's workforce the opportunity to earn an education and find employment, earning a really good wage across the state while remaining in the state. So as I said, WIP work began about 1.5 years ago, and it started with a number of conversations, really getting excited around what can we do to be innovative in this area. There's a few other states that have done some awesome work in this area as well. And so we kind of pulled from that and really focused on what we could do here in Wyoming. So I started in my position about 6 months ago, 6 months and like 4 days, actually. And so I've really been working over the past 6 months to really identify and organize the work that has already been done, and then plan for the rollout of phase 2. I've also been spending some time, and I'll go over these in just a minute, around how do we track and measure our success? So our short-term metrics, our long-term metrics, what a return on investment looks like for this program specifically, and for the work that we're all doing across the state as well. So to support this process, and before the weather got nasty, thanks Josh for the not in-person meeting, I was able to travel around the state and get to all of the community colleges. I met with many of the economic development organizations and other people in the community. I plan on doing that again in the spring. And so I actually hope to get a little bit more time with some of the workforce centers and some of the more economic development groups, and really understanding what the needs are and where we can identify those gaps so that we can look to fill those with education. So currently, we've identified about 20 short-term metrics and 19 long-term metrics. And we're in the process of collecting these metrics for phase 1 that has been rolled out for a little over 1 year now, and really starting to hone in on the impact that WIP is having across the state. So these are the short-term metrics that we are measuring to report back the impact that phase 1 is working, or that is making across the state. As many of you can see, these metrics are probably already being tracked in one way or another by the colleges, by workforce services, by the business council. And so really I'm working to pull them all together specifically to the phase 1 WIP projects right now, to begin to tell that story about the impact that this funding has made and this collaboration has made across the state. These ones are our long-term metrics. And when you look at these long-term metrics, they're not specific to WIP. And there's many of these items are things that we're all collectively working together towards. But I really do think that they tell the bigger picture and the long-term story. Some are specific to WIP, but most of them are more in regard to our workforce development, our economy, and our jobs across the state, new business starts, things like that. Something that I also didn't touch on at the very beginning is that WIP really is also focused around innovation and supporting innovation around the state through our education partners. And so looking at patents and how do we work on new business startups and supporting entrepreneurs throughout our state is another big area that WIP is working on. So these are phase 1, and as you can see, we have them set up into 6 different components: consortial infrastructure, energy, entrepreneurism, digital infrastructure and technology, tourism and hospitality, and healthcare. And each of these represents one of the programs that has been stood up or is in the process of being stood up through phase 1 of WIP funding. And so, I mean, there's a lot of success stories in regard to this. I'm going to just go briefly through many of these. So consortial infrastructure is really the baseline of what we need infrastructure wise to make this work across the state. And I think virtual reality and the course sharing platform are two really good examples. So VR can be utilized across so many different workforce training areas and education areas. And as rural as we are in Wyoming, being able to utilize VR technologies to support educational needs, whether that be in nursing or healthcare or welding. I'm in Southwest Wyoming, so there's been a lot of conversation with our industry partners and our Trona mines here about, can we do OSHA and MSHA training? Can we put somebody down in a mine in a VR situation and actually get them the education and the training they need without putting them in harm's way? And so I think that that's going to be an area across all of the colleges in the university that we can really utilize for Wyoming. The course sharing platform is another very exciting area. And this will allow our colleges to share educational resources at a higher level throughout the entire state. So some of these high wage positions that we're looking at or work areas that we're looking at training, part of the hindrance is actually finding faculty and being able to afford faculty to teach the courses in regard to these education areas. And so if we can have one very highly skilled person to be able to train across the entire state, instead of having to have one at each community college that has that program or is in need of that program, it really opens up the educational opportunities. So instead of going across the state to a different community college, a student may be able to stay and get the general courses through their community college and then get some specifics through a course sharing platform opportunity. So that's something that we're in the process of standing up. Both of these work groups are right in the middle of making some decisions, and so that we're getting pretty excited about what that looks like for the future of Wyoming. I think our power line technology in our energy sector is a really good example of partnership with industry. So we didn't have a power line technology education platform in Wyoming. And so we were actually, our Wyoming energy resources and our fiber folks, our cell phone folks, all of those that needed a power line technology specialty were having to recruit from out of state. And as we know, Wyoming folks take grit, and we know what the weather's like within our state. And we also know what the benefits are to being in our state. And so we want to hire people that want to stay here in Wyoming. And that was a huge issue, was turnover within this workforce area. And so Rocky Mountain Power actually partnered with Western Wyoming Community College and stood up a power line technology program. They have their first cohort in the middle of that program, and it's going very well. This was another one of those that they had to find and recruit a faculty member to build that program out and to teach that program. And they brought him in from, his name is Lance, they brought him in actually from Alaska. And there's not many folks that would be able to do that. And so this program is pretty exciting, and they're actually looking at how they can expand it with Lance as an instructor, and then maybe doing something a little bit different for the actual lab portion. They actually do have poles that they climb and outside areas that they're working in at Western right now. The entrepreneurism area it's kind of differed for across the state. It's everything from training for search and rescue out of Casper College to the Center for Entrepreneurism and Innovation, which is really working on focusing what programs and what support do we have across the entire state? How do we collaborate that? And then how do we promote that so that entrepreneurs across the state know where these resources are and have access to those? There's also a number of maker spaces, and I'd be willing to bet that almost all of you have access to some sort of a maker space in your community. They're pretty exciting. And there's also been a lot of work around partnership with Impact 307 through this entrepreneurism program, and really focusing on where we can support new business development and entrepreneurs across the state. So digital infrastructure and technology, this is an area that we're seeing a need across the nation, across the world. And a software development degree is a good example of some of the excitement that we've had with this component. One of the programs actually started in Sheridan, and they have a fantastic faculty member that they had there they actually kind of modified a computer science program to make it more accessible to students throughout Wyoming. They stood up and got accredited a new software development degree in Sheridan College. They have since shared that curriculum, and I believe there's 2 other community colleges that are in the process of getting that accredited, and they're in partnership with the University of Wyoming to stand up a bachelor's level degree that is in partnership with that software development associate degree. Our tourism and hospitality has some great things across the state, and those are focused mostly in areas that's needed. I think that's one of the awesome things about WIP in the community college structure, is that we are able to focus on what the communities in that area, what they need, and what their workforce needs look like. And then healthcare is one that I think we're going to see an increase in, at least I hope we see an increase in for phase 2. Across rural Wyoming, we have a huge need, and it kind of coincides with the nationwide need of nursing and healthcare staff. We've seen a huge amount of turnover in that area. And so I know that there's a lot of work going into meeting that need and filling that gap. We're not training enough and not putting enough people through the education programs to fill that need currently. And so we have to really look at how we can fill that gap. So next is the time frame that we're looking at. Like I've been talking about phase 1. So phase 1 will actually complete its self at the end of June. And really, that's the basic infrastructure support. I just ran through all of those. I won't go into much more detail. I will have some more metrics. I'm hoping to have some preliminary draft metrics for phase 1, either later this month, beginning next month. And then by the end of July, I'm hoping to have some good metrics around phase 1 and the work that we've put in. Phase 2, we are actually about a week and 2 days away from receiving the phase 2 applications. So those are due at the end of this month. We will spend the month of March going through those, filling any gaps that we need to, and then hopefully we will have a announcement towards the end of March from the governor on what he would like to prioritize and where he would like WIP phase 2 funding to go towards. I'm looking forward, like I said earlier, to that shared curriculum through our course sharing opportunities, through some VR opportunities, and then also really seeing students being able to graduate from these newly stood up programs or to transfer to the University of Wyoming, depending on what their goals are. Talking about phase 3, that hasn't been defined yet. There's lots of conversation about what that might look like long term. And I think it really depends on what, how our collaboration continues to grow and how we continue to build those programs out, as well as looking at what the needs are across the state. And the last thing is I would like to just share, so we do have some brochures. I did go through, we reimagined our website and have gotten a lot of information on there. So when all of you get questions about what is WIP, you can share this website. There's a ton of information about partnerships, about the phase 1 components and the different areas, the different programs under those components. We will update that with phase 2 as well, as soon as we get all of that information out there. And then I'll also be updating it with metrics, especially return on investment, so that we can share success stories across the state and really talk about the work that we're doing. One of the other things that I'm in the process of is a marketing RFP, which will be a statewide effort to really put out the information that I just shared, different parts of the components that would make an impact in certain areas, and some of the bigger success stories across the state as well. So really letting our communities know, our taxpayers know, our students and their parents know, and our industries and our businesses know what we're doing with the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, where they can get more information, and how that they can be a part of the transition that we're working through at the state level. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Ron. I appreciate it, and I look forward to having a robust conversation and answering any questions later.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Great presentation. So you presenters are doing a great job. We're on time here. So I'll kick it over to CEO Josh Durrell. I'm sure everybody knows Josh, but we can go through the business council and what we do and what we hope to do. And then we'll follow that up with a discussion and question and answer period. But Josh, for now, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Ron. And just so everybody knows, I think it's pretty not only fascinating, but I think it's also really important to just remember that all of these agencies, we work really closely together, and there is overlap in every single one. And I think the good news is that there's a lot of collaboration happening, whether you kind of see it or not. You know, our BRE efforts, our recruitment efforts, our entrepreneurship efforts, the efforts that our regional team puts in, work very closely with all of the groups here to make sure that workforce especially is a big deal, because we hear about it all the time. And I don't think we're alone in that. You know, I think a lot of times we feel like, oh, Wyoming must have a workforce problem, or, you know, Wyoming must have a blank problem. Well, I think just about everywhere has these challenges. And I don't really see it as a problem. I think that we're all working together toward the same thing. And what we have here are a lot of solutions to those challenges that we face. There isn't a single company that we talk with, whether they're in the state already or whether we're recruiting them, that doesn't say, how do we make sure that our workforce is happy and that we can retain them and that we can grow their skills and do all that? That happens every time. And every employer should be asking those questions. The cool part is we have, I think we have more answers than anybody else. So I think what makes us uncommon is the fact that we have such close collaboration and we have a lot more answers than other states do. And that is something that sets us apart. And we continue to double down on it. And I think it's a really key component in keeping companies here, keeping the workforce here, and then growing that by bringing more in. So I think it's a really cool opportunity for all of us to see this. And I can't wait for the Q&A session. And you probably can't either. So I was looking at our presentation and I got a little bit worried because I don't think it's quite as good as the ones before. And then I remembered that that's okay. It doesn't have to be. And then also that it's just a good idea to remind everybody kind of the different ways that we look at these problems. And again, because I think if we look at all the different perspectives on kind of the same problem, we can see some ways to solve them. So I'm looking forward to walking through this, and hold on just a moment and I will share my screen. Okay, so I think now you can all see my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. One thing I always like to start with is really our team and our mission. And so you should be, if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up if you can see a screen with a bunch of great looking people on it and our mission. Okay, so you know, we have well, it's not a giant team, but it's also not a small team. But we're a team of somewhere between 30 and 40 folks who are working really hard every day to do these things, which is lead that economic growth that we know our state needs, to build resilient communities and create opportunities for Wyomingites. And again, the cool part is that you can see a lot of shared vision and shared mission amongst the folks that have presented so far today. And so we're going to dive into each of these elements about leading economic growth, building resilient communities, and creating opportunities, and kind of the way the Business Council tends to do that. And before we go further, we're going to show another group of good-looking folks, some number of our board of directors. Here, we're actually comprised of a board of directors of 13 business people from around the state who really kind of help guide us in executing our vision, and as well, they help us make recommendations for the projects that we fund. And I think it's really important to note that we are a little bit different. We're what you would call a quasi-government entity because we have this board of directors, and it gives us a really, I think, like a board of directors should, it gives you a view of the world outside of your agency, which is really important because they keep us with our finger on the pulse of business. They keep us making sure that we're making decisions really smartly, and that we're keeping our vision in mind for the future. And over the last few years that I've been able to be involved with them, our board of directors has done a great job of guiding us in some pretty tough situations and some challenging moments. But you know, we keep our vision at heart, and things tend to work out. You know, I think a lot of times people go, well, what the heck does building capacity, local capacity, and creating opportunities and all that stuff means? And the only way I can describe it is with the triangle. It's just kind of how I see the world, is that, you know, as a whole, at the state level, we should be thinking about policy. We should be thinking about funding opportunities, and we should think about how do we really kind of encourage that that growth at a local level. And some people call that leadership, but ultimately it's how do we make sure that at a local level things can get done as effectively as possible, because we know we have, you know, 99 communities, 23 counties, people on the ground really trying to make things happen in their communities. How do we help that the most? And one of the things that we have noticed over the last few years is that the more help you can get at the local level, the further your mission is going to go. And so we've really been focused heavily on building that local capacity. And because, again, it goes back to building resilient communities. The biggest thing I think about is how do we help our communities be able to handle the ups and downs that they're invariably going to handle over the course of time, because we are so dependent upon particular industries. And we have really built systems that really fundamentally work when those particular industries work. How do we change that game a little bit and make sure that we're resilient? And we think that the best way to do that is to build leadership in those communities, to fund projects that continue to pay themselves and continue to build that local economic development capacity, and do that in every case that we can, and really focus on that. And if it doesn't build that resilient community, then we kind of scratch our head and say, why are we doing it? The other thing that I think is really important is this whole idea of leading economic growth. And I don't know, you know, there are a million different folks who have said something to this effect, but the bottom line is if you're not growing, you're shrinking, or if you're not winning, you're losing, or something like that. But the bottom line is we've got to continue to think about how do we grow and how do we create that economic growth that's going to sustain Wyoming. And that's a tall order, but it's one we focus on every day. And again, we utilize our mechanisms of policy, of funding, and of leadership in our services to do just that. A few components. I would say that most people immediately think about the Business Ready Communities program as the Wyoming Business Council. So this is you know, really what we're famous for, and in some cases maybe infamous for, depending on your side of things, and that's okay with us. We understand how that works, and the Business Ready Communities program is really how do we make it so that communities can thrive and create their own economic development engine that we no longer have to be part of. And I've said this sort of jokingly in the past, and not really jokingly, but we'd kind of like to work ourselves out of a job. It would be a wonderful place if Wyoming's economy and each of the locales were so good at economic development that they said, Business Council, who are they? You know, that would be a wonderful time, because that would mean that the individual communities are so good at it that they don't really need our help. And that's really what we focus on every day, is how do we create that? And if you think about being able to inject some money into a project and into an asset, into a community, that's really what we're after, is how do we build an asset in a community that then begins that cycle and that sustainability of that funding and the growth to start from that asset. And again, we're trying to create that local resilience, and we feel like local control is not just a concept that works for most folks in Wyoming, but it works for us as well. And again, we want to focus on those projects that have the opportunity to really kind of take off and develop a cluster or develop an industry that we maybe haven't seen before. I'll jump off of my soapbox here in a moment, but I really want all of us to think about something. You know, the industries that sustain us and will continue to sustain us into the future are the things that we have that nobody else has. Nobody else has the beautiful outdoors that we have. Nobody else has the national parks and the national monuments that we have. We have those, and you can't take them away from us. And what's under the ground is also something that we have. It's a gift that we have. And those aren't necessarily going away, but what we want to do to lead that economic growth is to bring things into the state that we don't have that advantage where it is here and you can't take it from us. We want to bring in those businesses that you could transport, that are portable, because that's going to give us the resilience and the base in order to handle the ups and downs of those other industries. And I think that combination is something that we sort of struggle with because we're not used to it. And I think that's been our really our big charge, is how do we play in a game that we're not used to playing? And obviously workforce is a key component of that. And our partnerships here clearly show that we're ready for the future there. This is something that we've been looking at really closely, and it's important for us to note. We look at all of the challenges that we face, not by what solution should we provide and what silver bullet do we have that could kind of to cure it, but rather what is the problem that we're really trying to solve. And in fact, it's frustrating to a lot of people. You can nod your head or wave or however you want to do it if you've been frustrated by the business council saying, well, wait a second, what problem are we trying to solve with this project? What problem are we trying to solve with this legislation? And that's because we truly feel that there isn't going to be the first solution that you come up with is probably not the right one. We also feel that if you don't fully understand the problem, you're going to spend a lot of time, energy, and money solving a problem that may or may not exist. And that's a gamble that we don't feel like we have the resources to take. And we also feel like you'll end up maybe, again, building that capacity of how do we solve problems rather than how do we throw solutions at things. So that's something that we're going to continue to be to double down on and focus on, and in some cases be even more frustrating on. So I guess you're welcome, everybody. You know, we've been undertaking a few different programs along these lines. I think it's important to note that we've been undertaking for the last few years a community survey to really understand what are some of the assets that we have in our communities, and what do our citizens feel that are assets in our communities, and how do we leverage those the most so that we can kind of understand that. And so that's something that we're working on, and we've worked closely with the Wyoming Statistical Analysis Center at the University of Wyoming. And we've been kind of doing some surveying, understanding the data, analyzing that. And I believe results are going to be out this spring. So we may even have something to show at our next board meeting in May along those lines. And so we'll kind of push for that. I think it's an important component to understand what we have and what we think we have in our communities. The next project I wanted to tell everybody about is what's called Pathways to Prosperity. And we named it that just because we felt like it needed a name. But really what I think we need to all realize is that it's not really a project, and it's not really it's not really something that we're going to package up as a report and hand to people and have them go, oh yeah, this makes sense, I'm going to do what's on page 2. Rather, this is how we are going to analyze every situation or problem that we're in, and really how we're going to get rid of the barriers to growth and how we're going to create that capacity on a local level. And we're being guided by the folks at Harvard's Growth Lab, and we're working through that right now in various ways. But like I mentioned with the Business Council, you know, the Growth Lab is really looking at how do they work themselves out of a job and go solve some other problems by teaching us how to solve economic challenges. And so this gives a brief timeline of at least that work. But what I can tell you is to focus on that last item on the right there, that ongoing systems change. And all of the work that we're doing right now is just defining how we will work in the future. So this idea of work streams and this idea of analyzing a problem down to its core components, that's not going to go away when this is sort of done, because it never really will be done. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood how this is working, what it means, and that it will continue to be ongoing. Now, what it will do is help illuminate where those challenges truly lie. And it will come up with answers for particular problems. And it will also come up with answers that might be, you know what, this one's not in our boat, it's in another area's boat. Or this is the real crux of the issue. We all think, how many of you have heard this? The real issue with economic development is housing. Raise your hand if you've heard housing is the issue for economic development. You should all raise your hands because I know you've all heard it. How many of you have heard that workforce is the real challenge for economic development? And we could go on. And what we want to do is stop having those sort of knee-jerk reactions, simple things that we throw out there and say, oh, actually, with housing, it is these 3 elements, or this 1 element, or these 10 things that we need to fix in order to do that. So rather than having this big global issue that we could all point to and use as sort of a, well, for lack of a better term, a scapegoat for it, what we want to do is get down to the nitty-gritty of what is really a problem, and if it's a problem, and if it's not, we're going to toss it to the side and work on the next one. And we're just going to continue to do that and really make those, policy changes and investment changes that make a difference. I also think that a number of the folks from the Growth Lab might be on this call today and will be available for Q&A to clear up anything that I might have messed up on this slide. So again, this is one of the work streams that we are working on, which is workforce development. Because again, we know that it is a challenge, but we don't know exactly what the challenge is. And so we're going to continue to work with the folks on this call and the folks throughout the state to truly understand what that is and to see what kinds of solutions might be there. Or maybe there are areas that we do really, really well and we take for granted. So we're going to continue to work on that particular work stream. In addition to that, we are, and this is actually coming up in the next part of this work session, is we want to try to help understand what are the challenges with the industrial sites or the business park sites in our state. And one of the things that business ready communities for a long, long time was about developing these industrial parks into things that site selectors and businesses could really take advantage of quickly. And so we have been engaged with a company that does site selection evaluation, helps us understand what the game is, helps us understand where the shortcomings are of our sites, and helps us understand how do we respond and play this site selection game so that Wyoming is in the running. Because again, we do have a lot of opportunities in Wyoming, but if nobody knows about them, they're not really opportunities. And so that's something that we are working to change as well. When we think about all of those things are going to help build local capacity, but one of the things that's maybe even more important to us is our regional directors and a number of folks that are throughout the state. It's not just these folks who are on the regional director team, although these are the faces you probably know the most around the state, but we have a number of people spread out throughout the state that work in various ways for the Business Council. And we've been lucky to be able to open up our hiring to a statewide audience rather than just very specific areas of the state. I think a few years ago, in early 2020, we were predominantly in Cheyenne. Most of our team worked from the Cheyenne office. And since that time, we've actually been able to make that about half and half now, where we've got members throughout the state and been able to widen that pool of team members and really get to the talent that's throughout the entire state of Wyoming. And so that's been really an effective way to do that. But these folks who are like boots on the ground are providing those services to build local capacity. And I would see these folks as teachers and facilitators because they really are intending to make it where their impact is about getting someone up to a level where they could do it on their own and helping out when there's a challenge, but teaching along the way so that if they're somewhere else in their region, that that things can still be happening. And so I think that's it's a big key to us is that way to teach rather than to give. Also wanted to, I do want to mention that maybe I'll jump back really quickly. This coming soon silhouette does not look anything like the person we hired. Let me just say that. Okay. And I don't know if we can announce that, if Heather's on and she wants to announce it, or if somebody wants to give me a thumbs up, but we did make an offer, and they are moving in, I think, toward the end of this month, and they'll be in the state and ready to go for that East Central region. So just wanted to make note of that really quickly. Another area that we are working on is what's called the Wyoming Academy. And again, to follow along those how do we build local capacity? One of the things that we noticed is that there are many leaders in a community. I think we could all, take a list out and list off 10 people in our communities that make a difference in our community and understand how to get things done and really lead. But one of the things that we also noticed is that economic development is a little bit of a challenge for folks to understand. And how do we combine leadership and economic development so that we can continue to grow leaders in economic development and help our communities be resilient? And so we teamed up with Leadership Wyoming to develop the Wyoming Academy, which will kick off. The applications are due, I believe, at the end of the month. And then we will start our first class, I believe, in June up in Cody and Powell. And that'll be a class that goes around the state. So about 30 individuals from the state will spend 3 days in different locales and 4 times during the year, and really kind of understand how local leadership makes a difference and what economic development is in various areas, and kind of get them exposed to, again, really kind of a combination of leadership and economic development and how important those two things are together. We're really excited about this. It's a way for us to kind of extend the team that we all work with and make sure that people are able to get done what needs to get done from an economic development point of view. Here is, I think it's important to note that the Business Council does work not just on kind of those industrial parks or funding buildings and things like that, but we also do a ton with Wyoming Main Street. And Kayla Clare is our Main Street manager, and she is cruising throughout the state doing these. And I think this slide speaks for itself. It's pretty darn exciting what she's able to do with Main Street and her board there. Thinking about all of these different things, I think we can all appreciate how important a vibrant Main Street is, and how those can make a big difference in your community. And again, build that resilience in. And so that's something that we work on a lot. Startups. This is a really cool thing, because it helps us tie in to some of the work that really the Workforce Development Council as well as WIP talked about. There are a number of different ways that supporting startups ties together with entrepreneurship, apprenticeship, and a number of the innovation programs that are coming out of our college system. And I think it's important just to understand how important that is, and how, in some ways, how young that is in the state. There's also something that will be coming out in the next we hope to announce it soon, about the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which we've been working on for a number of I think about 1.5 years or so, if not longer, to utilize that money for funding of businesses and really kind of as an investment into those businesses, rather than maybe some of the collateral support that it's been used for in the past, and kind of helping those high growth startups take off. And then I think some of us have been, obviously know that we work closely with a number of partners in addition to the ones you've heard from today. But again, I think it's important for all of us to take a moment and just realize that Wyoming has a gift in its small size, and the fact that we all know the same people, because when you're able to connect the dots in a state, that is something that is very uncommon. And quite frankly, it is something that we tout a lot in recruiting, because there have been companies that have said to us, I tried to call my local representative to get an answer, just an answer, not asking for anything else except an answer. And they couldn't even get a call back. And I think that's something that in Wyoming, the access to our agencies and the access to people who can help is not common. And we rely on it a lot. And I think that it's something that we shouldn't take for granted, and we should just continue to work with, which is again why we're having a work session like this, to show that collaboration and to show how easy it is for us to get work done. I'm gonna talk through the Plenty opportunity. This was called Project Jupiter, and it's a really big opportunity that the Business Council, the state, and many others have been part of. The University of Wyoming and a native of Wyoming have been a part of since many years ago. But I want to start with Dr. Nate Story, who grew up in Cheyenne, went to the University of Wyoming, and unlike many people, he didn't leave. He instead decided he wanted to start his business here, whether it made sense or not. He wanted to start his business here and take off and really kind of grow a plant sciences corporation right here in Wyoming. And he did have to do a little bit of extra stuff because he's in Wyoming, and that's an okay thing. He was able to work with some folks on the coast in California and continue to take his vision to the next level. And so what started here and began to grow, it really started to take off when he was able to kind of stretch his wings and reach out to others in the plant sciences space and develop some indoor farming that quite honestly it's world-class, but it's also world record-breaking plant sciences are going on, and they're happening in a research and development facility in Wyoming. Now, this particular building, I believe, is their first commercial farm in Compton, California, which was unveiled in the November timeframe and is producing vegetables right now for supermarkets in the lower California area. So that's a really exciting thing, because a Wyoming company has an impact that is beyond just our borders, and it is making a difference. But what's really exciting about this too is that it has the opportunity for all of us to take part in the early stages of cluster development around research and development in a field that is brand new. And indoor farming, while in some ways is not that new because greenhouses have been around for a long time, this type of indoor farming is new, and it's the early stages of this. And we have really the beginning and sort of the lock on the most world-class research and development and the development of a cluster in something that is not going to go away, because it turns out we all have to eat. There are some big challenges that outdoor agriculture, especially around fruits and vegetables, that this tackles is experiencing right now that are not going to be easily overcome. And so for us to be in a position where Wyoming is the home of world-class research and development and the beginning of a cluster right here in Wyoming is something that we felt was worth a very large investment. In fact, it's the largest investment that the state has ever made in an economic development play. It's $20 million for this particular project, but that's going to mean 200 research and development scientists in the town of Laramie. And it's going to mean an excellent opportunity for the University of Wyoming to continue its innovation and its expertise in plant sciences and agriculture to really become a feeder school for this industry. And so it just represents such a good opportunity for the state and for our communities that we felt like it was worth a big swing for the fences. And when we talk about how do all of these groups that are on this call today fit together, this is the perfect example. We have been working with Director Cooley on how do we help Plenty explore the opportunities to bring people in and explore training opportunities and utilize the state funds to do that. Those were a huge motivator for them to be here? And how do we utilize what the University of Wyoming and what WIP can bring in bringing all of the community colleges and the university together to bring programming around plant sciences to do that? They couldn't do that in other states. And it's and even though they're in other states, they couldn't do what they wanted to do in those other states like they could in Wyoming. And so it's just such a great opportunity. We wanted to end with that because it really represents how all of these things come together and how we can leverage them to the benefit of the entire state of Wyoming. But ultimately, you know, this story that we tell about Plenty and how it started here and how we gave it a start. A lot of those companies leave the state. And I look at it as, you know, that's what we want to really accomplish for our children and for our future generations of Wyomingites. And it comes down to this, is the more we can do that, the more we have an opportunity to keep our kids in Wyoming. And I know that personally, as a parent, that's an opportunity that I want for my kids. They may choose to leave, but I'd sure like it to be because they chose to leave, not because they had to. And I think that many of us can identify with that. And that's the problem that we work to solve every day, is how do we create opportunities so that we can have our kids stay in Wyoming if they choose? And so with that, Ron, I'm going to turn it back over to you and keep this train rolling.
Awesome. Keep the train rolling. I like it. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, all the presenters. So I think going forward now, we can get Q&A going, maybe get some discussions going. I think to kind of keep things focused, we'll ask people to click on the raise hand icon. If we're finding that we might be better off using the chat, that would be fine. But I think it's a good opportunity to use raise hand and ask questions and get a discussion going, rather than just typing in questions, if that makes sense to everyone. We do have our panelists, and then we are also joined by Fabian Libera, who is the chairman of the Workforce Development Council. And we also have Lucas Lambie with the Harvard Growth Lab, in case there are any specific questions about the Pathways to Prosperity project. And while I've been talking, we have hands raised. I think I saw Kathy Tomasi. Kathy, if you want to get us going, and as Josh said, keep the train rolling.
Okay, and this is a question for Lauren. Lauren, when you were talking before about the components that WIP has determined, how did you decide on those components? And another question, how are you going to measure the success of WIP in eventually what is the metric you're going to use to measure success?
So the original components were actually defined by the governor. So he chose, after some careful consideration and some input by others, what he felt was most important for phase one. So as we're working towards phase two, I'm actually pulling, I don't know if you're aware of Lightcast, the group. And so I'm actually pulling some career information, some job information, and that in terms of workforce need for the state of Wyoming for each of the components to ensure that we are still investing in the right areas and to support, you know, the original decision. And so, I mean, we're working through those things. And to answer your second question is, I think that success with WIP, first of all, I think part of the reason why people are confused about what WIP is because it's so varied. It's so varied based off of workforce need. It's varied based off community need. It's varied based off of so many different things. And I think that the answer to your question is not as simple as just one metric. I think that we're going to have to utilize many of those metrics and really look at, I mean, if we can say there were this many, business startups from entrepreneurs that found their support on this website, or, this new program, let's take software development, for instance, it, was able to put out this many students who out into the workforce in the Sheridan area. And then, we can add that from across the state as students work through the systems. They stayed in the state of Wyoming and they were employed within the state of Wyoming within that workforce. So it is going to take a few years. Unfortunately, most of them won't be immediate, but most of those are going to be things that we can tie together long-term and really look at the return on investment in that way. Unfortunately, it's not just going to be one because you're dealing with so many different areas.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know if it was going to be the number of people enrolled or if it, I figured it probably was many things, but thank you, that answered it.
Sure.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm just going to go in order on my screen here. It looks like Pam Thayer had her hand up.
Thanks, Ron. This is going to go to Jennifer and Kari at Wyoming Workforce. So couple things on the apprenticeship new programs, excited about that. On the Senate File 78 and the pre-apprenticeship, the ARPA funds, I'm just confirming that's going to be for secondary schools. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then
one thing I can add though is that part of the pre-apprenticeship program is standing up a dashboard that I believe will be used for more than just pre-apprenticeship, although that's the focus at the beginning, to better track a lot of these opportunities and match potential participants with those opportunities.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my second question to that is, what is the pathway to get this information out about these exciting to the Senate File 78 and the other program?
Well, you know, Senate File 78 is actually all about getting the word out. It legally requires our department to send this information to the schools and legally requires the schools to give that information to the students. They have to actually post it on their website in the final form of the bill. So the bill was just passed on Saturday, and I know we are still awaiting some of the funds for the pre-apprenticeship grant. So we're just doing the process right now to get those moved from the governor's office to our office. So we have not done very much communication at them about it at this point because neither one is really rolling yet. And so there are a few different initiatives where we're looking at some heavy marketing. And so I don't know, Director Cooley, even if you want to pipe in with anything else on this, but right now we're kind of waiting for the final pieces to come into place basically so that we can start trumpeting a little bit more about these things.
Thanks, Kari. I think you said it exactly right. It's all coming together at the exact right time with all these parts and pieces. So once they do come together, we'll get the word out jointly with the pre-apprenticeship and the new Senate file. We'll get everything into the schools together. So I think you said it perfectly, Kari. Thank you.
Kari, thank you. And thank you, Director Cooley. I think another suggestion, I actually sit on a local school board, so definitely spreading the word, but you know, a lot of us read the Wyoming School Board information that we get weekly from them. So that might be another avenue that we get emails weekly from the Wyoming School Board Association, just a suggestion. And then the last thing is, this goes back to Lauren on metrics, is an idea or just a thought is you've got some great metrics coming, and Josh showed them a little bit ago from the Wyoming Main Street communities, because we track that every month. So just, you have that data already coming out and easily accessible. So thank you guys, great presentations.
All right, thank you. And looks like Mark Laws had his hand raised for a while. Oh, I think, Mark, I don't think you're muted, but we're not hearing you very well.
Oh, really?
There.
Oh, they're not.
You're kind of breaking in and out.
Is that any better?
Yeah, we can hear
all
you.
Right. It's always on. The question I have is, again, you still hear me okay, Ron?
Pretty well. You're breaking up a little bit, but it's better than before.
All right. Well, it's Starlink, so there, huh? Storm. My question is not specific to things that were apologize for that, but I've been thinking a lot about lately from a workforce standpoint. And I was in the student education heading to Wyoming right away when I was back in education, heading because of the value that Wyoming put on education. And I'm a few around, so we start seeing some the preschool during it. Is a problem so big that a little tough to try to tackle, and I'm specifically talking about preschool, universal preschool care, that kind of thing, because that's really a barrier when it comes to workforce. And am I still coming through? Because you're kind of looking like you can't hear me.
Yeah, we're losing you a little bit.
I'm gonna pass.
Kari, I saw Kari shaking her head. Did you decipher that, or should we have Mark type his question in?
My take on it was just the issue of workforce having adequate childcare, because Wyoming does not have very many options, especially in a lot of communities when it comes to preschool and childcare options.
That's correct. And if you can still hear me, an example, I mean, it created universal childcare and their maternal discipline 11%.
Yeah, we kind of lost you again.
Sorry.
Mark. That's all right. Well, thanks for trying to get that question in, Mark. I don't know, Kari, is that more of a question for DFS, or do you have anything to add there?
Well, Ron, I love that you put it that way. So before I came to Workforce Services, I was at the Wyoming Department of Education. And I think one of the issues right now is that childcare services through the state are spread out through multiple entities. Some run through DFS, some used to run through Workforce Services, although that got moved over to the Department of Education on July 1. Some goes through the Department of Health. And it's very confusing to navigate all of that to make sure it's all working together, and that all of the, of the resources that the state does put towards childcare are working to the maximum extent when they're running through so many different pathways. So I know that Governor Gordon's office has had a focus on that the last few years. There was a bill last year that would have consolidated everything together, but it failed. And so he's kind of taking just some actions on his own, but I think it's a good thing to keep a little bit on the priority list. And that is one area where I would love to see what the Harvard Law Group has to say on availability of childcare and how that is potentially impacting workforce.
Thank you, Kari. All right, we have a few hands raised. I'm going to switch gears from the board. I'll get back to Business Council board members, but we have Dr. Sandy Caldwell with the Community College Commission. Do you have a question?
Good afternoon. I just wanted to add a little bit on the apprenticeship. I think Director Cooley and Kari Akins did a fantastic job. In terms of communication, I actually sent that out to the college presidents this morning, and that in turn went to all the dual and concurrent and to the academic affairs. And I think you all know that the community colleges serve all 23 counties, and they also work with all of the school districts with the secondary schools. And so they'll be working to see whichever one of those apprenticeships are going to be available for concurrent credit, for example, so that they're working toward a stackable as well. So I think the communication is going to happen in multiple levels. And you've got a lot of different folks who are watching that, but just know as soon as it happened, we had communication going out. So I think that may help for you to be aware of that.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. Cindy Johnson from the Business Council Board. You've been waiting patiently. Thank you.
Oh, mine's a little bit different kind of question, but one of the things I'd like to know is how you work with agencies such as Climb Wyoming. Maybe this isn't a question for Carrie. You have all these different programs. Do they fund, and I don't know how the dots connect, but do they fund programs like Climb Wyoming so that and I hear from some of those women, they get really very, very nice jobs at nice wages. But they, again, childcare and other things are an issue. How do we tie that all together? Do you even fund that agency, or is that separate?
So I'm unsure right now if Climb Wyoming is on our eligible training provider list, but they certainly, I believe, would be eligible to apply for that. We actually do have the leader of Climb Wyoming is a council member currently. So we're very happy to have Katie Hogarty lending her expertise, because she brings really great perspective about that exact struggle of what they're seeing for the people who come through their program, and gives that really good perspective. But that is the nice part about the eligible training provider list, is that it is for both private and public entities that are providing training. They can apply for that to be on that list.
And the other thing that I think we all wonder this sometimes is that all these organizations, can we ever break it down into how much money are we getting for programs and getting to the people who need these programs versus admin? You know, we always say, gee, we like to keep admin at 20% especially in nonprofit agencies. And I'm just wondering if there's ever going to be a time where we could keep track of that. So we can, I think probably we should brag about that if we could keep administration under a, 18%. 18% is kind of a magical number. So that would be just an absolute number. If we could come up with that and track that, I think that would be good for all of us, not just Wyoming Business Council or just you or Wyoming Workforce. But so thank you. Those are my questions.
Well, I'll let Jennifer Wilch pipe in maybe a little bit more, but on the WIOA side, if that funding goes towards, if it goes directly to a participant for something like, the shoes for Kevin was the example that we gave, or if it's for paying for a participant to go through a program versus paying for, the staff for workforce centers, that is all tracked at the federal level, because of course it is. Everything has to be tracked probably pretty deeply. So that is something the council watches. When we said they do the funding allocations for the program, that's one of the things that they're looking at and having to consider is how much are they going towards making sure there's staff in the workforce center versus dollars that need to go straight to participants. So that is something that the Workforce Development Council looks at with the funds that they have to spend.
Thank you, Kari. And now we have a voice from the Workforce Development Council. Ron Wild, looks like you're on the phone. Do you have a question, Ron? Yeah. You're on mute, Ron.
Okay, so I'm actually on the computer, Ron, but I guess it's more of a statement for everyone rather than a question for anyone in particular. But the Wyoming Workforce Development Council is hosting a Next Generation Sector Partnership Academy in Lander on March 23rd. And the Southwest Wyoming Manufacturing Partnership is looking for partners in the hospitality and tourism sector to start up a hospitality and tourism sector across Southwest Wyoming too. So if you guys know of anyone that would like to attend, it's my understanding that the Workforce Development Council is covering the cost of the hotel rooms, and we'd love to see more people up there to participate.
Thank you for that reminder, Ron. Appreciate it. Director Cooley, did you have follow-up or a question of your own? Go ahead.
I have follow-up, but I know Alex has been sitting there waiting, so I'm happy to wait if you want me to.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, Cindy, I was just going to answer your question. With Climb, we've got Climb Wyoming, we've got DADS, we've got a lot of programs that we work directly with. A lot of those individuals qualify under WIOA for our services. So we work directly with them on that in those with providing services to them. So it's a wraparound type of situation to help them when they're going through those programs. And they're wonderful, wonderful programs, and they really are such great assistance to help them get into the workforce and get that great job, or get that job beyond where they're at right now. So I think really good opportunities. When we talk about administrative costs, you raise an excellent point. But in Wyoming, we're so rural and we're so spread out, and we're a minimally funded state, which means we get, because of our population, we get this minimal funding that the Department of Labor gives out. So a lot of our costs really do go to administration, just so that we can fund our 18 workforce centers around the state. We could reduce our administrative costs and go more virtual, but frankly, it's such in rural Wyoming, it's such a wonderful thing to have that in-person place where people go to provide those services. During COVID, it was so wonderful. We were the only workforce services in the nation that stayed open, because we had people that literally couldn't get online to apply for unemployment benefits. And we had people that didn't know how to do it because, so many people had never done that before. So having those workforce centers around the state has been such a wonderful thing and benefit to the state, but that we really don't want to go there. So that administrative cost is something we really keep our eye on, but it's something that in rural Wyoming, it's always a struggle for us. So if that helps a little bit with that answer, it's something we keep our eye on, but it's a struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cooley. Alex, you have a question?
I do. Yeah, no, thanks for putting this together. I now want to be an intern for Ron Goldberg, if that's an option. So I'll put in my application and see if it gets approved. But I'm kind of curious, I've been on the business council for going on 3 years now. And I just recall, in our last meeting, we heard from a business that received some funding from us, and they talked about the cost of training some of their CNC operators and some of those skilled positions. Has there been an occasion where we've been able to partner with Wyoming Workforce Services and provide both the business council grant for the infrastructure or the building and provide some workforce training for the people that are to be hired? And if not, is there a way to potentially formalize that a bit? And that's, I guess, kind of an open question for both Wyoming Workforce Services and I'll put Mr. Durrell on the spot. How's that?
Go ahead, Josh. From my perspective, I suspect it's happening organically. I don't know that there is that connection that we're saying, hey, this is happening. Why don't we connect? I think it's happening. Well, you talked about plenty, and I think that it's definitely happened with that facility. I think it's happened in the past more organically. So I'm hoping that with plenty, it's going to start being more formalized, and I think that we can work on that. We do have an obligation to report to the Business Council the training fund loans that we do or grants that we do make, so that there is that connection. But I think if we formalize that a little bit more and make that connection a little better, I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, and that I think organically is exactly how we're doing it. Our regional directors, obviously know these programs pretty well. And I wanted to give a shout out first, Director Cooley, for joining the call and being on here today. I know you are a busy person during the session, especially. There's always something about workforce services in the mix there. So I appreciate your time today, but also because, and this is, I think the organic nature has worked and has had an effect, right? It's been good. But I do think there's an opportunity to sort of say, okay, now that we've invested in this way from the Business Council, here's sort of like the startup packet. here are all the things that need to happen next. And a connection to workforce services is really clear. With Plenty as an example, Director Cooley said, hey, we want to get them on the horn. We want to start to walk through all of the different programs and give them a point of contact so that when questions come up, they know exactly who to call. And I just thought that was fantastic, because your team, Director, came on. There were a number of people on that. Everybody from Plenty, the company's like, wow, we're able to see who's there, who are the people that we need to ask, and just to understand how easy it is, again, to get the answers you need, and to understand that it's not, oh, we have some program, and once you get through the registration and the application process and all of that, we'll talk to you. It's like, no, let us help you through that process. And I think your question, Alex, is a really good one. How do we make that less organic and just, it happens because it happens, but make it part of the process, that when you work with the business council, or when you work with Department of Workforce Services or whomever, that that there's a next step, that there's other agencies, and make those connections and make sure that they happen. Because it's leveraging the investment and doubling down on the investment, rather than just saying, oh, well, let's just see what happens. So I like that a lot. I think we can put some work to that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Director Cooley and Josh. And I did, Brandy Harlow, Northeast Regional Director, reminded me that Weatherby used the pre-hire workforce training grant through Sheridan College. So that does work. And I think there's an opportunity to go beyond the organic and almost like a concierge service, I guess. You heard the steps, especially as we look at these projects coming forward in the future. Kari, it looks like you got your hand raised.
Well, when you mentioned concierge services, it just did also remind me of what our workforce centers do as far as hiring events. And so when a business is opening or scaling up, that's one way that there are business representatives in the workforce centers that work directly with those employers to try to help them attract their workforce. And that's, not a program or a grant they have to apply for. It's just sitting there waiting for them.
All right. Any other hands raised? Chairman Libera, should I put you on the spot since you joined us?
Sure. No, I just want to say thank you to all the presenters. It was a good session. And I was kind of thinking in terms of what I just heard kind of coming out of the conversation, which is how do we, perhaps leverage the various touch points that we do have. We've got 6 regional directors with the Business Council. We've got one-stop centers. We've got all these people embedded in communities. And how do you leverage that? Because, during a council session with our Workforce Development Council, we'll have a team of folks from the Department of Workforce Services kind of give an update on workforce training funds and applications and recent activity that we've had. And invariably, people within our own council are surprised at what a great program or programs those are. And so I'm always thinking about, how do we leverage all these ambassadors that we have to get the word out on all these great programs. And so I completely support this collaboration effort. I think it's great, and to pick up a thread that I think was a conversation topic a couple of years ago, how do we cross-pollinate the 2 councils? I know that, Ron, you've joined us and your predecessors joined us in the past and been a part of the Department of Workforce Services Council, or the Workforce Development Council, sorry. Is there a mechanism, and what would that look like in terms of us on the workforce development side, kind of, having at the front of our minds the initiatives that are going forward with the Business Council, and how do we bring that into what we're doing so that we do have that kind of cross-pollination effort going on.
Thank you, Chairman Libera. I did see in the chat, we have Dr. Michelle Aldrich with the Department of Education CTE program. I don't know if you want to be a panelist status and answer. Looks like you have an answer for federal grants, Dr. Aldrich, but some of the federal grants limit administration to a certain percent. For Perkins grant, it is 5%. maybe we can promote Dr. Aldrich if she'd like to speak more. In the meantime, there've been a lot of programs, a lot of partners. We've learned about WIP. Does someone from Workforce Services or Workforce Development Council want to talk a little bit about next generation sector partnerships? I think that is a question to some people too. I talked to staff about that. Ron Wild talked about the Southwest Wyoming Manufacturing Partnership. There's also HAMP, High Altitude Manufacturing Partnership in Laramie and Albany counties. And I know Larry Fodor is on the Workforce Development Council doing some wonderful things with the construction side of things on next gen partnerships. And he's developed a model for other regions to follow a program for construction opportunities with the school districts that he started in Laramie County, and they're looking at some other counties. So that's a very high level overview, but it really is kind of the industry at the center of the table, and maybe people aren't quite familiar what next gen is. As we all go forward, how do we collaborate? Maybe if we learned a little bit more about next gen. Kari, I see you smiling.
Well, I'm happy to start it off very high level and hope that other people will add more substance. But as Jennifer mentioned during our presentation, kind of one of the required functions of the Workforce Development Council is having some sort of focus on industry sector development and career pathways. And so the model that the Workforce Development Council has chosen for that is those next gen sector partnerships. So we have a contract with John Melville and his group that facilitate those next gen sector partnerships. And as Ron mentioned, we do have an academy coming up next month in Lander that is invite only. And so I'm going to actually put Jennifer Wilch's email in the chat so that if you have somebody that, you think should be there because they would be great at either joining a sector or starting a new sector. This is a time where Next Gen is really, we're having this academy again to really kind of figure out what this is going to look like in earnest post-COVID, because a lot had to be suspended for a while. And now we know that a lot needs to change. Now, businesses don't operate in the same way. Workers have different demands than they had before. Businesses have different needs than they had before. So this academy that's coming up is kind of the first real, all right, like how do we need these sector partnerships to operate in the post-COVID world in order to be successful? So I know Ron mentioned they're trying to get a new sector started in the Southwest. We've also got, I think, Goshen County, Platte County, and Niobrara County looking at a new sector partnership. So if you're hearing anything buzzing there, then please email Jennifer Wilch, and I'll put that in the chat, and we'll get them invited to the academy and see. We're doing Next Gen 101s online now, so offering those more frequently. So if you've got someone with any interest, we'd love to get them into the loop.
Thank you, Kari. And
Yeah,
Dr. Aldrich, thanks for joining us.
Oh,
sorry, Jennifer, I talked over you.
The model is business first. So all those people who are in that sector, the community base for, let's just say the construction part, that those businesses come together and they're at the center, and they're really the driving force, and then government and other entities support them in their efforts. And so although the council facilitates a lot of this, it's really business driven. And so in a community, if you don't have a real leader, real gangbuster who's really trying to move this initiative forward at the business level, the partnerships struggle because it's not meant to be led by government and local entities. It's really the businesses. And so I invite anyone who would like to know more about it to let me know, and I can set up the 101. It's an hour-long session where we just talk about the model, how it works, and how it works in specific communities. And then if you're still interested or you'd like to support your community's partnership, and we have that on our website. And we do have some really exciting new partnerships developing. There's some momentum in around Gillette. There's restarting some momentum around Lander. And those exciting things are happening at the academy. And so after 101, if you want to join, then you can get you registered for the academy as well. But please let me know. We could definitely get a 101 scheduled anytime.
Thank you, Jennifer and Kari. And I apologize, everyone. We've got InSite, the industrial parks presentation coming up. So we're going to take a 10-minute break at 3 o'clock. We've kind of run out of time. I apologize to other people who have their hands raised, but I hope everybody sticks around for that. I think it's going to be a very insightful presentation and discussion opportunity. So please take a pause for 10 minutes. We'll reconvene at 3:10, and then we'll have the InSite folks presenting with us. Thank you all.
Can you guys hear us? Cool.
Sounds great, Wendy.
All right, are you gonna get us started, Josh?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick us off. So I'm probably not going to kick us off necessarily in any specifics around the site selection project that we've been working on. More than that, I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a higher level view of this and let the experts talk about site selection and talk about the industrial sites or, potential sites or maybe never sites or whatever it might be in Wyoming, because they know that particular area better than I do. But really what I wanted to mention is this project represents something that in some ways, sometimes people have been afraid to dig in and understand what the problems are with something, because it might make us look bad, or it might say that, gosh, this place that I thought was an industrial park is never going to be an industrial park. And what would that mean? And, I look at it exactly the opposite way. I look at it as that we need to be asking these hard questions. We need to be looking at the data, and we need to be doing this with expertise that we may not have, because if we don't do that, then we don't know what to fix. And if we don't do that, we don't really know where to put our energy and our resources. And if we don't do that, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice because we don't know the facts. And so I really appreciate this project on a number of levels, not just because of the industrial site evaluation, but because we're willing to step in, and the communities that are part of it, we're willing to step in and take a look at themselves and say, what are our shortcomings? How do we get to the spot where we can, be a legitimate industrial park? And what does that really look like? And if we don't do that, and if we're afraid to do it, then we're going to be stuck for a long, long time. And so I just appreciate the project in itself. And I think it's a model for other projects. And there's no shame in finding out that you have faults. There is shame in pretending that you don't or ignoring them. And so I really like this whole thing. I think we're going to continue to do this in other areas. And I'm just really excited to hear what you found and how we can get started on fixing some things. So thank you very much.
Cool. All right, well, I'm going to kind of set this up as more like a panel discussion. So I've got some questions that I've prepped and kind of prepped them with a little bit too. But feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point in time too. We really do sort of want it to be more of an open discussion. But to remind you all of this contract that we signed, I don't know, 9 months ago, 6 months ago, Amy, whatever. If you remember back then, I think I had told you all that, what was it, December of 2021, we were at the Mid-America EDC conference in Chicago, and Tanya and Rob actually did a presentation at that conference, and they're talking about site development and how to be competitive and those sort of things. And kind of at the same time, we've been working with some of the communities on their sites and how to propose when we have RFIs come in for recruitment leads and things like that. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, Tanya is totally speaking my language. She is saying all the things that we are running up against all the time. And I think I have joked with her that we're like maybe secretly spirit animals with some of this sort of stuff, because we have a lot of the same thoughts on it. So once we sort of got past that, we were working with a particular community in the state that's trying to develop an industrial park. And I was thinking like, God, these guys would be perfect to come in and work with them and help them on what they're trying to do. And at the same time, Brandon and I had been talking about like, oh, we should do some like target industry studies. And so I called Tanya, talked to them a little bit, and realized that we had this great opportunity to not just like help a community figure out how to develop a site, but there's all sorts of communities that have industrial parks, business parks that are maybe just sitting there and not fully functioning. And why is that? Like, I know we've spent money on these parks. Why are we not getting things in there? So they convinced me that we should do this analysis instead of maybe a target industry study, which we can talk a little bit more about later on. But with that, we ended up hiring InSite Consulting. So this is Tanya Christ and Rob Cornwell. And I would love it if you guys could kind of introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about where you come from with all this.
Well, thank you, Wendy and team. We're grateful to be here. We appreciate being asked to be a partner in this process. We are passionate about what we do, and we're excited to learn more ourselves. So it's a two-way street, which we benefit also from this. Yes, Rob and I, our company's InSite Consulting, we have two core competencies, both having the same thing in common, which are ready sites. Okay, for effective site selection, we have to choose ready sites for our clients. For economic development, to actually recruit new jobs and investment, sites have to be ready. So we have over the last, I guess, almost 20 years in just under the wing of InSite, that's what we focused on. We work for siting, we work for actual companies and site all over the globe. Because thankfully we're not target industry or geographic focused. We're methodology focused and help make a decision for folks based on sites that are ready. And we got into economic development consulting because we were a little bit unique in that we kind of just take all the decoration and we don't blow any smoke. We kind of talk to everybody about this is what it takes to win. There's winners and losers. If you want to win in this arena, here's what we have to do to be ready. You guys are actually able to, not many other states can handle the truth. And you guys are kind of the first out of the chute to be willing, number one, to pay for it. Dirt related, site related recon, no offense, but everybody comes to us. We'd be multimillionaires if all we did was target industry studies. And I'll be the first to tell you, we've never cited a project based on somebody having a great target industry study. No offense to all those people that are doing all that. But usually we answer that question when people ask us, will you do a target industry study for us? And I'll go, geez, my conscience, to take their money and run, or do I make a difference here? So I always ask, the next question is, hey, send me your sites that are ready. Let me know what excess water and sewer so that I'll know what kind of industry can locate there. 9 times out of 10, they go, well, we don't know the answers to the infrastructure questions. Well, then what the hell are you selling? So, no offense, excuse me. But the point is, how are you going to target an industry with your site if you don't know what your site can do? So we've turned that attitude, if you will, into a constructive process that helps communities realize that before they can ever target an industry, they must be champions and experts on their product, because that's what the industries are looking for. So that's kind of our, I guess, niche, if you will. We're not necessarily a consultant for everybody, because we hope at the end of the day, everybody learns and we move the needle on progress versus placating complacency. That's kind of our whole edge, I guess, if you will. And we appreciate the opportunity here. We will always make it constructive, but it will always be honest and ethically viable. If not, we will not have made a difference. So that's kind of InSite.
You can tell we're not a real intense company.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'll try to.
We come laid back with our clients, but all kidding aside, though, thank you, Tanya. But I would like to say that both Tanya and I have been at the local level. So we do siting and we also evaluate sites, but we've also worked locally in economic development organizations. We've worked on the utility side. So we really understand how projects work. response times, that type of thing, as we bring it to, to you guys and to Wyoming, how we evaluate sites.
That's a good point, Rod, because any question that we ask, on these communities, we've had to answer ourselves as communities. We know the answers are there and we know how to get the answers. So that kind of helps us a little bit in this process, while at the same time having the flavor of site selection, which is a little bit of a ruthless process intentionally, because it's a multi-million-dollar decision where people will lose jobs. So it is intense for a reason. But Rob's right. We've worked at the local level. We've worked in siting for many, many years. So that's kind of what we bring to the house, if you will, for the process. But yeah.
So you talked about like being consultants and that site selection process. I think I don't know, people feel like there's this big mystery around recruiting companies and site selectors and what do they do and how does that whole process work? So can you talk a little bit more about like what site selection really is and why it happens? Why do companies hire site selectors?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And thankfully, we've somehow advanced this thought process beyond the name of the industry. It's called site selection. It's not called quality of life selection. It's not called target industry selection. It's called site selection. It has been, I've been in it over 30 years. And we've always, it hasn't changed. The site has to work. It has to have infrastructure to make it work. So the site selection piece is not mysterious at all. It's just not pretty. It has everything to do with what's in the dirt. It has to do with terminology like excess capacity for water and sewer, natural gas. I mean, why? Well, that's what makes the site viable to put a manufacturing plant on it. That's never changed in all these years. Now, how we gather the information is a little bit different, but the great thing about it is site selection. We're looking for sites that are infrastructured so that when we brick and mortar, when we go vertical, we can go horizontal, which means we can produce, we have enough water and sewer and electric and natural gas, et cetera, that we can produce a product on that site to make money. So site selection, really from our side of the house has always been very clear. It's yes, no, do you have it, do you not? You win and you lose. Sometimes that for the economic development world, it's a little difficult because that costs money. It takes time. Have you planned for it? If you haven't, well, you can't cry about it now. Either you make a change or you know what, you live with the fact that potentially your site is empty for a reason 20 years later. But we want to make sure that it's logical because it's really not elusive at all. It's all about the site and will it work?
Yeah, and typically, Wendy, and you know this, the site selection process starts out through an RFI process. It's a questionnaire about your community, about your state, about your site. So there's limited, if any, dialogue between the consultant or the company and the communities. So there's not any back and forth. So there's a lot of pressure on communities to answer questions accurately and very quickly on their sites and on their communities because you won't get a second chance. You have to respond very quickly to get that information back to us.
And from our side of the house, on the site selection side of the house, we can't figure out for the life of us, the site hadn't moved in thousands of years. How hard can this be? Okay, I mean, so you have to understand the perspective from which people are coming from because that's your audience. And you go back to the old Xerox methodology of, you know what, you didn't become a salesperson at Xerox unless you knew every single part of how that machine worked. And you went through a litmus, so many tests. It should be the same way. And we don't understand with economic development. If you don't know what your product can do, well, who does? I mean, so, if you don't know the specs of your site and your product, then unfortunately you can't communicate whether it's viable or ethically promoted as an industrial site. I mean, our clients are getting so irritated that they look at the label, we have a ready site or an industrial site, and you can't tell them what the excess water is. It's going to become litigious because it's false advertising to them. So at any rate, the worlds are interesting in how they see one another. But really, they both have got to have the one thing, which is a site that's ready to be effective. So, yeah, I'm a little much. So you can do this at any point. Yeah, Yeah, Brandon, I usually have somebody that kicks me at the table. So Wendy, by all means, yes. Just passionate because we want people to win and be productive, but they gotta be willing. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of like, just kind of some myths out there about site selection and stuff, or people think like, oh, I've got 50 acres. Totally can recruit something. Why can't I recruit something? What are some of those myths out there right now that are happening, and like what like leads that to communities doing something wrong in what they're doing with their site, or thinking that they have a site, or they have a site that's maybe not a good site?
Well, Rob probably needs to speak up because I'm probably going to get fired. Please don't hold this against us. No. The myths are that somehow or another, first of all, it's quality of life, which is hysterical. So, we go in and the problem is if you guys were on our side of the house, everybody 33 years later, you go into a community, everybody has a great quality of life. Okay, number one, they're usually recruiting local people, so that is not a differentiator. You can have all the great quality of life in the world, but if you don't have a site that's fully infrastructured, you're not going to stay on the radar screen. The other is labor. We talk a lot about workforce, et cetera. You can have all the great labor in the world, but if you don't have a site that they can actually build on that's fully infrastructured, all your great labor in the world won't matter. Because they can find a place that has labor or has the same labor situation. The key is it's a site selection first. So I think some of the misunderstandings are somehow or another, quality of life became one of the main driving factors. Somehow or another, things begin to trump that the site in site selection was lesser of importance, which is not true at all. And we haven't lowered the bar. So don't want anybody to walk away with the fact that at any point has the site selection industry gone, well, okay, just because they don't have water, we'll still locate there. I mean, I think that what people don't understand is, they're all dependent on one another. So you can have great water and great electricity, but if you don't have sewer and you don't have natural gas, you're eliminated. It's got to be everything. So I think that's kind of.
Do you think communities focus on that workforce piece of it though? Because they're like, oh, well, we can put in a water line, we can put in a gas line. Like, where are we going to find 200 people?
Well, and yes and no. I think that workforce, here's the issue, if I can be honest about workforce development and infrastructure. People that are in workforce development are educated about their core competency. We can take a client into a room. They can talk about workforce development. Okay, now, do we expect them to have a magic wand and to say, oh, we can have all this? No. Do we expect them to be conversant about their programs and their processes? Yes. We can't go into that same community and meet with the infrastructure team and then be able to tell us what excess water and sewer are. That's the problem. Okay, so workforce has the advantage of the fact that they know what they're doing and they know how to answer the questions, thank goodness. But when it comes to the site, somehow or another, it's already designed and engineered for something, but we can't quite get the answers to those questions. And so that's why you're hearing, you hear more about site and the workforce development piece is kind of, they get it, they get their core competency.
And I think, real quickly, I'm gonna jump in on this.
Oh, no, okay.
The other thing I would say would be a label on a site. So it's shovel ready or it's certified. You may have heard certification terms, which shovel ready and certification don't necessarily mean a whole lot sometimes. A lot of times there's levels of shovel ready or levels of certification. It just means we know what the problems are. We've identified that it has no utilities and we don't have a way to get it there. We just know how much it will cost. It'll cost $100 million. But we've identified that, and sometimes states and utility companies may stamp those as certified. And that's kind of a misnomer with site selection as well.
Well, and also a misnomer is that somehow or another, you guys are responsible for studies on behalf of somebody else's core competency. We get so frustrated when sometimes we get the answer, well, okay, let's pick on the sewer provider. The sewer provider goes, well, I'm going to have to do a study to come up with that answer. Who's going to pay for the study? Really? In this, is there really a world in existence of where I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll pay somebody else to tell me? I mean, you guys are asked to pay for studies for providers on their own systems that are actually going to make money off of the utilization of them. Something weird has happened in the ED world of where, you know, you need to own your issue, which means if if you're going to benefit from it, you pay for it. If you don't know the answers, you need to find them. So that all those are some kind of oddities that are happening in the economic development world. And unfortunately, all that from the site selection side of the house, all that noise just gets eliminated. So for the site selection side, which people don't love because of that, but when there's noise around the capability of a site, it just gets eliminated. We move on to where there's no noise. So yeah, I don't mean that to be disrespectful of anybody else's process. It's respectful of ours, which is unbiased, and we got to make a decision that's quantifiable and justifiable and, makes sense. So, yeah.
So talk about your guys' process and kind of like the process that we've been through since we signed the contract. Like what all we have done so far, kind of.
Yeah, that's good. That's
where we're at.
It's a lot. Yeah. Well, we, you guys have been really great because y'all have taken time for us to coach folks. So, we kind of come out of the chute versus testing everybody. Okay, we said, let's coach you on this siting process. Let's teach you how to respond, why the information is necessary, which is not the case a lot of times, but we came out of the chute wanting to be teammates and help coaching people to success. So that was kind of the process. The next thing was kind of, once we figured out people that met the criteria or sites or communities that kind of met the criteria for the size of the site that we were looking for, et cetera, we worked with their communities. We got their utility providers together and said, the next thing we're going to do is exactly like we would do if we were siting. We're going to quantify the capability and the capacity of your site. So we're going to ask the following, 50 questions about your site. We talked to all the providers, said no surprises. We're going to fill out a form that basically you tell us what your site can do. So that way we can assess it and evaluate it. So the next steps were literally, we deployed to all those communities a questionnaire, just basically asking them the specs of their site. Okay, that site that moves in thousands of years, that site that supposedly is going to have target market sectors, that site that supposedly everybody's got a label on that says industrial and economic development. Awesome. Okay, let's get the specs here so that we'll know exactly, we can be laser focused on how to, position this site for success. So we submitted the what we call data templates, because that's what it is for the clients. It's data on the site. They can do a desktop because they think you can answer questions or fill in a blank test about your own subject. And we got all those results back. Okay. And the great thing about this is that although one of us has a very strong personality, it removes any of the personality out of it. It's all data and quantifiable. Okay, yes or no questions and how much. And if you can't answer the questions, then you know what? That becomes reflective of your capacity and capability. So what we have brought back to you guys as a team that we're in discussions with Wendy and her team is we've got all the sites lined up side by side. Just like we would for Caterpillar, Procter & Gamble, any of those, we have color-coded the response, okay? Green means go, good. Red means fatal, flaw, or stop, or they don't know the answer, or there's a problem. Yellow means parking lot. It's all an industry model that y'all are going to get back. And we've lined up all the sites side by side so that you guys can see quantifiably, without personality or bias, how people could respond. Could they mobilize their local response teams, their providers, and all to get the necessary information that's in the dirt that makes the ultimate decision? So that's where we're at now, taking all of those communities and them having had a month to respond. We wanted to give them plenty of time. We were on the phone with them, helping them as much as they would allow us to get the answers. And now we're at the point where, you guys are Procter & Gamble. You guys are Caterpillar. We've got all the sites lined up based on their ability to answer, and you guys can see quantifiably who's ready and who's not and why.
So essentially, this was a pop quiz.
Well, state.
Well, actually, well, you know, and sadly enough, it wasn't. It was an open book test. I mean, yes. No, and it's funny you should say that because a lot of people said they're going to try to trick us. There's going to be trick questions. They're going to ask us questions that they didn't talk to us about. That's not the case. We started this out. You guys paid for them to have this knowledge to show off. We walked through every question they were going to be asked on the test. And so so that when it came time for them to actually fill it out, they still had the teachers. They had the book open. We had provided them with a PowerPoint, with notes, everything they needed to be successful. Okay, so but yes, pretty much you've been in biology class for 5 months, 8 months, whatever the time is now, and you know what? You're taking a test on the knowledge you've gained, trying to pass that subject, and that's what site selection kind of is. And the sad part about it is the process. People hate it, but it's very effective. It chunks the people that can't answer their questions on their own core competency. I mean,
I think when we started out, we had 25 sites that applied for the program. So there was like a basic application process that asked like acreage, if it's served with utilities, to your knowledge, what utilities those were.
That's it.
And that was it. So really like 5-question kind of thing. And from that, there were 17 that kind of moved on to the next like coaching phase, because the other ones they didn't have the right acreage. They really didn't have any infrastructure, or they weren't owned. Like if it's on airport land, that can be a little hard because when the airport owns it, no company really wants to lease from an air. So just some other like fatal flaws to start with that maybe didn't make them the right fit for this particular program. And then from there, we had 2 sites that like dropped out after that first kind of initial coaching session, like, this just isn't for us. This isn't what we want to focus on right now. Okay, great. And then one that went through all the coaching process and everything, and then just failed to continue to respond to them on anything. So never turned in their homework. They turned in their homework.
Didn't even say the dog ate.
Just disappeared. So we're down to like 15 sites that you guys did this final analysis on now that we are looking at side-by-side comparisons. And from that, we'll probably identify the top 5 to go do actual in-person site visits at those locations with these guys in June, when the weather's not, maybe hopefully not doing this sort of thing.
Well, one, if I can, the awesome opportunity that all these communities had was they had their client was right with them constantly. Okay, because you guys touch projects, nobody touches more projects than you guys. Number one. So it was a great opportunity to spend time with the client, because you guys, WBC will always be the best client any of these local folks, regional folks, et cetera, have, because y'all touch projects. And then no offense, but we're not special, but we happen to, thankfully do a good job for a lot of pretty big companies. They had our attention. And so it was resounding for us in some cases where folks were just shows it was free. Sorry, not to y'all, but to them. I mean, okay, to have day-to-day ops exposure to you guys, to us, to people that they could really spend some time with. But some things, as we say in South Carolina, is head scratchers. I don't know, but yeah. So at any rate, sometimes they need to remember that you guys are the ultimate client. Because y'all touch the projects. So, yeah, but at any rate, yes.
So a lot of those questions focused around capacity. So talk about the importance of what capacity is, whether it's electrical capacity, water capacity, sewer capacity, and the importance of excess capacity, because I think that confuses a lot of people.
Yeah, well, it's really cool once you think about it. I mean, like I said, we want to be relatable. It's kind of like if you were going to look for a acreage to put a house on. Okay, let's say it is $75,000 an acre. I don't know what it is here. It's 10 where I live. But anyway, yes, I'm not sure. But I mean, you're going to want to make sure that before you buy that site, that you can turn the water on, that you can flush the toilets, that the electricity will come on and stay on, that you have heat. Okay, so all the things, it's no different for a manufacturer. Okay, you need to make sure all of that's there so that you can use it. But the excess capacity, which is what is left over after everybody else has taken off, because this is where the providers know this information because they have to manage it on a day-to-day basis. All the volumes allocated to different places, to different companies, to different. So what we need to know is at the end of the day, what's left over for us to utilize in our process. Okay, that's excess capacity. Then based on the sewer plant, what are you already having to process? And how much room do you have for our capacity to manage it? So the excess, it's funny because everybody wants to give us their total capacities. And we're like, we don't need to know the total. The total is irrelevant. We want to know what is excess because that's what we're going to plug in and use. See, we hope that's logical, but it just doesn't seem to be. We don't know what happens in that communication with local economic development sometimes. But yeah, the excess is what is so important. I don't know, Rob, if I.
No, go ahead.
I was just to say, Josh has his hand raised too. I wondered.
Josh, so sorry, Josh. I didn't see hand raised.
So does Kathy.
Oh, goodness. Yes.
So I raised my hand minutes ago and my arm went to sleep, but I only raised it minutes ago because I wanted to beat Kathy to the punch because she is always the first person to ask a question and I wanted to ask one. So haha, Kathy, I got you. One of the things that, I think it's really clear that we need to, as a state and in our communities, we need to realize that there's a difference between the product we have, right? And that's a lot of what this study was about, the product that we have today. But I want to shift it if we can and talk a little bit about the market that product addresses. And I want to understand the size of that market. I want to understand how dynamic is it? What is the velocity? How many deals does a site selector see in a year? And is Wyoming even going to be on the table even after we fix all of these sites and get them up to snuff? Because one of the challenges that we have is we don't know what that market looks like necessarily. And I want to be able to quantify that so that we can think about the investments we're making from the market's perspective, not from our product's perspective, because I know both matter. But could you talk a little bit about the market in site selection and how big that is and how many opportunities are out there?
I think from our perspective in this program, this is the exciting part, Josh. Listen, siting consultants only handle, I think it's 24 to 28% of the site selection projects that are out there. Why do companies hire us? So that we can make a decision for them because their core competency is not in choosing a site. But the rest of the 70+% do it on their own. So the great thing about what you guys are doing is you're helping your communities be ready, okay? So that when companies are looking, okay, that without a siting consultant to be guiding or scrutinizing the way, they can maybe possibly become the coach. They become part of the leader. They can apply their knowledge now to the process to that 70% of the market that we don't touch. But the key is those decisions are still the same.
Yep.
So even though we may not touch over 70% of it, the information that they need to know, thankfully, is the same.
Right. So here's my question. I want to paint the picture for everybody who may or may not be listening or might watch this recording later, how many opportunities they might be missing because it needs to be worth it for them to go after the money to do this or the opportunity. So, site selectors touch 25% of the opportunities. How many is that a year so that we can extrapolate what the 100% looks like? How many site selections are made in a year in the United States?
Wow. I don't even know that I know that number because every real estate firm, every accounting firm, every engineering firm does site selection. Thousands.
Okay, so,
I mean, it's-
so we're talking thousands,
Yes.
maybe
Oh,
tens of
yes.
thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands site selections go on in a year.
Oh, yes,
And
easily.
we're not even part of any of those. That I want to say that again. There are tens of thousands of site selections
yes,
that go
yes.
on throughout the year. And we don't get a chance at those because our sites don't even have the bare minimum of data to be considered.
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah, Josh, yeah, that's our tens of thousands. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many site selection decisions and projects moving constantly. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Really quick, and then we'll answer the other questions. Tanya had made the comment to me upstairs that like most site selectors, they can go and find out information about every community in the United States just by like Googling stuff. Like they have all the information about everywhere. They know where workforce is, they know where land is, they know all of that stuff. But what they can't find out by just Googling stuff is capacity and infrastructure at a site. So that's what we as economic development professionals have to know for the site selectors, because that's the information they can't find out anywhere else. They have to rely on the locals for that.
And that's accurate, Wendy. I mean, that's thankfully the value in local economic development are those relationships and the ability to answer those truly local, changing, dynamic answers. Okay, because they do, the infrastructure changes on a daily basis. But Wendy's right. I mean, you know, we can profile a state, a community to the most minute level. But the frustrating part for our clients would love to be, quite frankly, to eliminate all economic development and be able to answer everything online, because they buy everything online. They make billion-dollar decisions online now. And they want to choke us out every time we say we have to get this done at the local level so that we don't make mistakes on the infrastructure. But yes, yeah, infrastructure, that's the core competency of all local economic development, the value add.
Kathy, what's your question?
And this is very quick, but I know that from the area I'm from, Southwest Wyoming, there have been many sites quasi-developed, I guess you could say, after listening to you. And it was kind of a chicken and the egg thing. What came first? Did you really manufacture or did you do the site first? And you've answered a lot of those questions. But of the sites that you have been investigating, are any of them up to par? Are any of them shovel ready?
This sort of. So we're not going to go into specifics and we're not going to name
Okay.
names yet because we have not given that information to the communities
And
yet.
that's
And I
perfect.
feel like they should hear that first from these guys
Okay.
as opposed to listening to it here. Happy to share that information after we give that to them. So they've just sort of shown Heather and I this information today, and they're going to give
Okay.
all of that to the communities, report back to them and give them like some next best steps for them,
Okay.
for sure.
Okay.
But I think in general, from what I can say, looking at that, we've got 5 that we think we can comfortably go do site visits from because we were able to get information from them. The other 10 sites maybe filled in a quarter to a half of the information that's required because they couldn't get it for one reason or another. Either their provider didn't provide it to them, or there was a study that needed to be completed, or someone just didn't know or didn't know who to ask.
Okay, good. Yeah, and all I wanted was the general information. Thank you.
And there's ownership questions and things like that too, when it comes down to some of the land things too, especially like in your area.
Well, and in defense of those, the chicken and egg process, wow, the expectation has moved the bar is so much higher now, to where if you don't have the infrastructure there, you get eliminated. So there's no longer, we'll fast track it, we'll get it there. Communities, the successful states and communities are truly having to invest in getting it there without the actual client in order to be in the game. So, and that has moved, that needle has moved, that bar has gotten a lot higher in the last 5 years also.
And I think so. I've been doing this 4.5-ish years now. I think like some of those first projects I was involved in, it was like a 2-year timeline, like, we're kind of looking right now. We could put in some infrastructure. We could do this. And now it's like, what do you have ready in like 6 months? That like COVID has just shortened the timeline so dramatically from what it used to be, I would say. Like Brandon couldn't do this anymore because it's way different than when he did recruiting stuff.
Is that a challenge?
He's like, what are you guys talking about right now? Thought it was still 24 months. Cam.
Thanks, Wendy. So this is a combination of a statement. Just first of all, kudos. I'm going to wear my business council hat for a minute, and then I'm going to wear my ED hat. You know, this is the kind of things, this is talking about the triangle that we want to start broad and give these tools to the state so we can be within. I mean, Josh, you and I have talked about another program about development very similar to this. Excuse me. So this is exciting. This is a service that the Business Council is offering. And to hear that, now I'm going to wear the City of Rollins hat for a minute, and we wanted to play and participate in this, but we didn't have that 20 acres or some of those requirements. But what I think is really interesting is to be ready to moving the bar. I mean, this is what we should be doing at the Business Council, teaching our people within and broadening that. So kudos to everybody on this project. And it's just so, I mean, I sit here and wish we could have, because I would have loved to be one of those people with boots on the ground, learning this to actually move that needle in Carbon County. So I'm just excited that this is moving forward. I want to say that the 5 sites that are going to potentially be moving forward, those 10 sites that couldn't answer all those, they've learned, and they're going to be better the next time. So that's really what we want to do with this project. So thank you. I really appreciate this presentation, your candidness on all of this, and excited to hear the finals. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask a question? I don't know if I don't want to take anybody's like a board member's opportunity to ask, but is it wrong-headed to think about too, and maybe to go back to what Josh was talking about being responsive to a market and to demand and building the things that are demanded, to look at, I think this is right, that our issue with site availability and capacity isn't just a recruiting issue, that we aren't going to pull ourselves into economic diversity in Wyoming with recruiting. And I say that as the recruiting guy forever. I adore it. It's the fun part, right? But what's the right place? I mean, I think that one of the things is that we're missing opportunity for existing companies to expand significantly, right? Because if they can't expand in our communities, it does come to an infrastructure thing, and they might not know it until they've invested a ton of money and made a real problem for themselves. So I think there's some high risk there. But for a community, how do they sort of start at knowing that a huge portion of what they're going to do in sites is speculative? You're just going to have to build something really, really excellent and hope to attract somebody. But how do they also start to, do they need to blend sort of that? Like know your local industry, know your growth trends, know all these fun things, know what's coming, build for that, and then build like a little extra on the side for recruiting? Or are there communities, and this is so the third rail, and I've never said it out loud, but I'll just say it now because I'm most camera, but I don't think every community in Wyoming should be recruiting. It doesn't make any sense. So why would, but relate that into the sites. Is there a way, is there a not easy formula, but is there a good way of evaluating on the community side what they should be doing? What should you be building? Everybody should have some property available that meets the need of industry, but how do they know? How do they know where to put that in? Because I think right now everybody thinks they should be recruiting, even if they really know they shouldn't. It's like what the cool kids do.
That's accurate.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be, for example, if you've got a community that's already got some existing industry base, and they may be limited on sites, I think that's a no-brainer, particularly if they know what their excess capacities are by the city or the county or whoever provides that, is to go ahead and identify property that those companies can expand to. Okay, maybe it's 50 acres, maybe it's 100. I'm not sure. If it's a community that doesn't have any industry, they're limited with their excess capacities, then to your point, it's probably not their business. However, can they be experts on whatever buildings are available? Maybe that becomes redevelopment. It's still the same principles. Tanya and I talk a lot about excess capacities on infrastructure. It can be translated to your existing business. Do they know you have an expansion opportunity at this new park that is designed for you? We know you're landlocked. We know you also are looking for a facility that might, you're evaluating facilities all over the country. Here's a spot for you. And here's the excess capacities. It's the same concept. It's just maybe a different market. And then if for some reason they're not in the industrial market, you could translate that over to downtown redevelopment. Are they experts in what's available? Are they experts in the incentives, the financing, the loan program? It's the same concept. It's just maybe different capacities or different assets that you're talking about. Does that make sense?
But the way they figured that is through an internal audit. I mean, so you got to figure it all goes back to data and information that figures out what is the highest and best use of my organization based on the capabilities that we have. So you vet it out. You vet it. Can we compete in the industrial arena? Because here's the things you need. Okay, no, but this site maybe can be this because of the capabilities it has, or it's this size and it's located downtown. Maybe it could be an incubator. Maybe it could be R&D. Maybe it could be. But the key is there's got to be an internal audit versus everybody telling them what they're going to do in the economic development efforts, telling people that my site's going to do this, my site's going to recruit that. Figure out what the highest and best use of your capabilities are through an internal audit. Then you can direct and say, you guys need to be focused on downtown redevelopment and BRE. Okay, those are your two capabilities, or you need to be on small business and entrepreneurs, have loan programs, have strong BRE programs. Stop doing the recruiting. But the problem is, Brandon, is everybody wants to be, you're right, everybody wants to be the star quarterback. And unfortunately, they're doing their community a big disservice when their highest and best use could be just as productive, except in a different arena. And part of what this process kind of does, it does help in that letting people realize, I'm sorry, but your site can't compete for this. So the highest and best use of this site or your capabilities might need to be focused here versus everybody gunning for recruiting businesses. Not everybody can win. It's as I say, it's a D1 level process. I mean, it's the best of the best that are competing all over the country. And one of the things that we see that can help make everybody kind of more successful that we see in other states and other communities is true, really strong partnerships, at the local level, et cetera, in helping with the internal audit. Because a lot of the ability to what you have to do doesn't lie in the economic developer's knowledge. It lies in what the capacities are across the board, whether it's product, whether it's being able to do loans, whether it's ability to do BRE. So, yeah.
One of the sites that didn't make it through, it was one of the first 25 that applied, but didn't make that first cut. It was actually overdeveloped. Do you remember that one? You called me and said, this is a housing subdivision plat map. And I'm like, no, it's really their business park. So it was overdeveloped and chopped up into little 2-acre, 5-acre sites and stuff like that, which is great for this little community that maybe some of their downtown businesses could expand into that don't need a lot of area to go in, but to recruit a manufacturer there, it's never going to happen because you'd have to tear up all sorts of infrastructure that's already at this park to all these individual lot sites. They really treated it as a residential development instead of an industrial development.
Yeah, and that's a learning curve. ED folks should know this, but industrial is always natural lot lines. You don't superimpose boundaries on a site, and you definitely don't build infrastructure into it. I mean, it's so funny because we're like, where in the hell is this coming from? Well, it's coming from people misleading local economic developers. But yeah, we can tell right quick. As soon as we ask for a site map, if it's busted up into lots, it goes into the trash bin. They don't get it. They don't get it. It's all about natural lot.
You want infrastructure to the lot line.
not inside the site, right? Yeah, not necessarily, definitely don't put a road into the site. Get it to the site boundaries, but not into the road, into the site. So yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you can overdevelop it, then that limits what you can do with that site.
Yeah.
So you want infrastructure to the site boundaries, but you want like the most opportunity to do different things.
Flexibility. Yeah, none of our clients expect you to have roads. So if you have an 80-acre site or a 60-acre site or even industrial park, they don't expect you to have already run the roads into it unless you have existing industry there. They just want to know that the roads are to the park boundaries and to the infrastructures to the boundaries. See, it's not that difficult. They don't expect you to run the infrastructure and stuff into any particular site. They may choose a different footprint or they may, but see, that's.
So we've traditionally overbuilt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe overbuilt the wrong things.
Well, a lot of times, for example. Yeah.
Well, if you don't overbuild, you won't build the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Don't try to predict what.
Particularly
Okay.
if it's a larger tract of land, if it's a larger tract that's got great capacities, yeah, as Tanya said, you want to get the infrastructure to the site, and you can have a conceptual, but let's don't take a 200-acre tract and make it into 25 and 20-acre tracts. If you want to compete maybe at the national level. Okay. Now, so I think that's the key.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's sadly that is, because a lot of bill of goods have been sold to master planning for that doesn't go together, zoning and all that some, but master planning, you don't master plan an industrial site. You just figure out what the natural lot lines and what the contiguous developable acreage is. So then they know I've got a 60 acres here, is free and clear. I can put a footprint on. And then I'll figure out how to get the infrastructure to it as long as it's near to the boundaries. Yes, unfortunately, folks, it's the industry's fallen for a little bit of incorrect information. Yes.
And if you want to put a 60,000 square foot facility or 100,000 square foot facility, like you need a large chunk of land, because then you have to think about all that parking that goes with it. And it sort of needs to like fit on like the natural topography of that too, as to what works best. And if you have roads already ran and stuff, like you may not be able to, it's like if you're going into subdivision, and you want to build a ginormous house, but you have a little 10,000 square foot lot, it's not really going to work very well.
It's the same difference. We've overcomplicated it and made it really expensive.
Well, and this is an assumption, but knowing what we've done and what we've helped fund is what we've done is created a box for ourselves where we provide infrastructure for what we know. So Wyoming is traditionally an energy-driven industry. We know buildings for oil field services companies, for all of these things. So we build for what we know. We overbuild, I should say, for what we know. And then we wonder why we can't get outside of that box and diversify and attract different. Oh.
See?
Sorry, but that's about oil field services buildings. They're just shells.
They're shells.
They don't need a lot of water. They don't need a lot of sewer. They don't need a lot of electricity. But like the projects that are coming down the pipeline, like nationally, like when you talk about data center stuff, that needs a lot of infrastructure. When you talk large scale manufacturing that is very automated, it's very electric intensive, it needs a lot of electrical capacity. When you talk about plenty, for their research and development facility, they need, what is it, Josh, 15 megawatts, 20 megawatts, just for the R&D side of things. If they were to build a full scale farm, that's 50 megawatts worth of power for an indoor farm. So you need a lot of capacity for that sort of stuff. That's where the capacity issue comes into play. Like all the DAC stuff that we've been working on, that's like 250 megawatts worth of power for like DAC structure. I don't even know what you call those, but yeah. So it's just crazy, like the amount of
that's super
infrastructure that we need compared to oil field services buildings.
Hey, Wendy, can I ask a little bit of a different question, and it may take the conversation in a slightly different way? I'm kind of curious, as you've gotten to know Wyoming, what are Wyoming's strengths in the site world?
Oh, you're asking Wendy or asking us?
You two, I'm
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I was like, well, Wendy. Well, number one, what speaks volumes is your guys' proactive efforts on trying to meet us, on our terms of getting sites that are ready, being focused on having product that is ready, because everybody talks about incentives, and okay, incentives are important. They will never trump infrastructure. So, it's great. I think the access, the type of workforce you guys are known for, trainability, for, being a strong workforce, but I'll just be honest with you. I think the problem that we have right now is being able to zero in on sites that can actually accommodate and put those good folks to work. Listen, workforce is an issue everywhere. So, but not everybody has the potential of a good workforce. You can profile your guys' workforce fairly easy and realize that the people y'all have in your workforce, based on the industries, et cetera, are good, a trainable workforce. It's not the case everywhere. Okay. Now, do y'all have it running out your ears? No. Does anybody know? But you're known for having good people that are willing to work, et cetera. Pro-business climate. Okay, I mean, that you're going to be here. It's going to be pro-business. You've got all of that. The struggle, and you've got an organization that gets it, which is, listen, there's a couple of states we just want to deal with. Yes, because they get us fired.
It appears, in our limited experience here with the WBC and having, you appear to be very agile for a state economic development organization. So where you could make a contact very quickly, you can make phone calls. There wouldn't be a lot of bureaucracy in terms of getting answers. That would be a perception that we have of the state.
Yeah. Yes. And the fact that, like I said, Josh and all of y'all on the front end of this, you guys are not dealing with a popular topic. I mean, like I said, and nobody wants to talk about infrastructure and water and sewer and natural gas, but that's where you win and lose the ball games. I mean, you can't win without them. So yes.
Can I ask a follow-on question? What's something you thought you knew about Wyoming that's different now?
Okay, Rob.
Okay. That's what I'm here for. Tap dance a little bit. No, I think.
Interesting.
Okay, so from my perspective, we haven't consulted on this.
Yes, that's right.
So who knows where this might go?
We might fight.
We might fight about it. We just turn the camera off and y'all just excuse us. But I would think one of my perceptions would be in this process, I would have thought we would have seen the larger sites. Okay, with either all infrastructure that we have to tweak a little bit, or either close proximity infrastructure. When I say larger sites, I mean over 200 acres.
Yes.
That I'm a little surprised that we wouldn't have been able to see that pretty easily. So that would be the first thing that I would think of. Yeah.
Did you think that because of our rural nature and because of our land plan?
Yes. And it's a great point, because in a lot of states, rurals are leading the charge. I mean, they're getting their product ready, and because we like to site in rural America. We don't like to site in urban America. And rural America, man, is just jamming now with getting their product ready, et cetera. And I think Rob is right. I had written down size of sites and readiness. I was really shocked because you guys have the advantage of having rural areas, which is a tremendous asset to our clients, but yet don't have the large sites. And I've been a little bit surprised about the providers.
Yeah, a good point. When I say large sites, we're not talking about, I'm not saying a mega site.
No,
I'm not saying 1,000 or 2,000. I'm talking about bread and butter, large projects. 150 acre plus kind of sites that you could develop 150 contiguous acres to. And then as Tanya was going to, I think, maybe lack of information from utility providers, maybe their involvement, maybe that's a little surprising. Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of different than where we see everywhere else. Especially, I guess, the electric providers are they're on the cutting edge of economic development. Not only they pay for everything, they pay for us, we've been all over this country on the dime of electric providers wanting to get site ready, making sure they're able to produce the right information so that they can, they can churn the meter. We were a little shocked, to be quite frank with you, at the lack of willingness and participation by some folks that really need to be leaders versus obstacles. So yes.
Josh, looks like Josh has a question.
Oh, no.
No, it's less of a question and more of a, I think, just logistics wise. I wonder, and I don't know what the next steps are for this. If there are other questions, we could definitely pose them to the panel. I think everybody here took away a bunch from this already. And we're already going to get our video editing team in here to get some sound bites out of here. And because I think some of the information that has already been shared is really, really useful to folks across the state. And I think that it is important for us to like continue to get it out there. But I kind of think we ought to have maybe a follow-up to this after you've had a chance to go out and talk with some more of the communities, coach them up on what the results were and where there are some shortcomings and all that. Obviously, we can't share that until it's ready and until we've shared that with the communities. But again, I look at it as this is an opportunity for us to get better and use this information as a way to get better and have an acknowledgement of what reality is, at least from site selectors' perspective, which is a pretty powerful reality, and make sure that we utilize it. So what I might suggest is we do this again after more of that information has been shared with the communities. What do you all think about that?
I think it would be good.
Sure. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes. And it's transparent too. The great thing is you guys will have the data. I mean, it's what we do is very transparent. So
the September board meeting would probably be great to do this again, maybe just because it will be completed by then. We would have done the site visits and all of that other work too. So really we could get into here's sort of the final. We're not doing a final report per se, but here's sort of the final data that we.
Yeah, the findings. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
So Josh, I think that's really good. And I think very helpful for all of us. I also think we should be discussing as a board any of the BRC stuff that comes through, it washing through a very similar process before it even hits the investments committee or it hits the investments committee with a washed through process in terms of what we've learned from this site selection. So we're not overbuilding or we're not investing in stuff that we shouldn't be, quite frankly, or investing in stuff in the wrong way and just figuring out what that looks like internally in our process from learning lessons from this and then tying that with BRC and what investments look like.
I can't agree more. That's exactly right. Let's take this information, utilize it, and make sure that we're spending money in the right places for the right things, or at least know what game we're playing. So I love that. I think that's really critical.
Awesome. You will find we are not one of those agencies or pseudo agencies that asks for a study or an analysis and then does nothing with it.
That's why she said we are doing a target industry study. Because that's what happens with that.
I don't like that. No, we just can't. Wendy, you're too good. Let's do this.
We are executors.
Yes.
Not executioners.
Yes.
That's true.
Depends who you talk to.
Anyone else have questions out there on the board?
Well, I do, but there are questions that you're not going to answer today. So we'll talk about those later.
We can do that.
Well, and the great thing is we also will identify areas where that your guys' presence and your guys' capability can help us move the needle on some things. I mean, there's some bottlenecks that's going to require you folks to be a part of a process that moves the needle. And I think this is great to meet this group, but also to say, you know what, as you know, we're going to need you, but we're going to need your boots on the ground on some things. That's going to require, like I said, some voices. You know, we must say, we can say things that you guys cannot say. Must be truthful and honest and ethical. At the same time, we're going to have some folks to help us follow up, because there's some things that need moving. Yeah.
So Josh, if we're getting ready to wrap up, just a reminder for everybody, we'll start at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Virtual, unless people want to be here, but we'll see what happens. If it's a blizzard, then keep that in mind.
My hotel room.
It's not a blizzard yet. So I think it is a blizzard though, maybe in the southwest corner of the state, Kathy. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really snowing out right now.
Casper has been upgraded to a blizzard.
Okay, yeah.
Wow.
If we can't get here tomorrow, we'll just.
Downgrade.
Oh, okay.
So Josh, I think that's guys are pretty good to go.
You promise.
I mean, I just love this whole work session. I'm glad we were able to make it work virtually and really appreciate you getting out here and getting up here, and you might want to get out of here. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for the energy and the expertise on this topic. It's a big one for us, and it's not going to stop. We're going to continue to utilize this and continue to help people understand what the market needs and what the market desires. That not just about our product, it's about the market too. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
And I think this needs to be a work stream for P2P. Just put that plug right there. I already planted it with Sarah, so.